If the Star Palace falls, do you think I can remain safe, fellow Taoist Han? Besides, I'm not asking you to fight Wan Tianming to the death. I'm simply asking you to hold him off while I lead the Star Palace in a retaliation against the Starfall Coalition. Surely that's within your capabilities, Brother Han, Ling Yuling said in a slow voice as her brows furrowed. That is indeed something I'm capable of doing. However, Wan Tianming is a great cultivator as well, and I won't be able to predict whether he'll try to engage me in a battle to the death. If you agree that I can flee the battle should he unleash some type of powerful trump card, I can consider stepping in on this occasion. Then again, the welfare of the Star Palace and your safety are two completely different matters. Even if the Star Palace ceases to exist, I'm confident in my ability to keep you alive, and that'll be enough to fulfill the promise I made to the former palace leaders. Otherwise, it's really not worth it for me to take this risk just for the benefits that the sages offered me in return. Han Li's calm reply highlighted the crux of the matter. Ling Yuling's expression changed slightly upon hearing this. Meanwhile, Elder Zhao had read between the lines, and his brows furrowed as he stroked his beard. Fellow Taoist Han, from what you're saying, it sounds like you won't necessarily refuse to help us, but we have to pay a sufficient price in exchange for your assistance, right? Of course, nothing in this world comes without a price. If your Star Palace offers me sufficiently tempting remuneration, I can consider taking a risk, Han Li admitted with a faint smile. What do you want from our Star Palace, fellow Taoist Han? It was Elder Ma who had spoken on this occasion. It's not a matter of what I want. Instead, it's a matter of what your Star Palace is planning to offer to me, Han Li replied expressionlessly. Different expressions appeared on the faces of the Star Palace elders, and some of them were beginning to converse through voice transmission. In reality, none of them were overly surprised by Han Li's rejection. If someone were to ask them to fight a cultivator of the same cultivation base to the death for no reward, they certainly wouldn't agree to do so, either. Furthermore, this was going to be a clash between two great cultivators, beings who stood at the pinnacle of the human world, so the risks involved would undoubtedly be more severe than in a battle between cultivators of a lesser caliber. However, it wouldn't be an easy task to offer a reward that could tempt Han Li. After all, a great cultivator like him would most likely simply scoff at normal treasures, materials, and cultivation arts. Ling Yuling sat in the main seat and looked on with a contemplative expression as the elders conversed among themselves. After a while she broke the silence and said, "Your proposal is quite reasonable, Brother Han. However, ordinary items clearly won't be able to catch your eye, so I'm willing to offer the cultivation art of our Star Palace's divine essence-effused light and our divine essence-effused mountain as a reward. Will that be satisfactory to you, fellow Taoist Han?" The divine essence-effused light is an extremely powerful cultivation art, and only a man of Brother Han's extraordinary talent deserves to cultivate it. The reward that Ling Yuling was offering was none other than Han Li's objective for this trip, and this turn of events came as quite a surprise to Han Li. His expression faltered slightly before he appraised Ling Yuling through narrowed eyes and fell into deep thought. All of the other Star Palace elders were startled to hear this, but after exchanging glances with one another, none of them stated any objections. The divine essence-effused light was indeed an extremely powerful cultivation art that had been used by the late heavenly star sages. However, it was also quite renowned to be very difficult to cultivate, and its disadvantages were also quite apparent. As such, for normal nascent soul cultivators, this was certainly a tempting prospect, but it wasn't actually one that held much practical value. As such, no one had any objections to Ling Yuling's proposal. Instead, they were all worried about whether Han Li would actually agree to this deal. Much to their surprise, Han Li only contemplated the offer for a short while before nodding with a meaningful expression. "It seems that Fairy Ling already knew what I wanted. I'm not a greedy person, so I won't ask for any more than that. I'm happy to accept this offer. When the time comes, I'll help your Star Palace hold off Wan Tianming. I can't guarantee that I'll be able to kill him, but I'll make sure that he won't be able to attack any of you. All right, our Star Palace has full trust in you, Brother Han. I'll get someone to give you the cultivation art for the divine essence-effused light, and once this battle concludes, I'll present the divine essence-effused mountain to you." A smile had reappeared on Ling Yuling's beautiful features. Seeing as he had achieved his objective, Han Li didn't wish to stay here any longer, and he rose to his feet as he said, "In that case, I'll be awaiting further instructions from you on how to proceed, fellow Taoist Ling. It's been a rather tiring journey for me, so I'm going to take my leave and have some rest." Ling Yuling immediately nodded as she turned to Elder Zhao with an amicable expression and instructed, "Of course. Elder Zhao, organize a silent cultivation chamber for fellow Taoist Han so he can rest and recuperate. Fellow Taoist Han is an esteemed guest of ours, so I'll have to trouble you to look after him, Elder Zhao." Elder Zhao nodded and extended a bow toward Ling Yuling before leading Han Li out of the hall. Han Li nodded toward Ling Yuling, but didn't immediately follow Elder Zhao out of the room. Instead, he suddenly turned his gaze to Elder Zimin, upon which a faint blue light shimmered through his eyes, and only then did he make his way out of the hall in an unhurried manner. A chill ran down Elder Zimon's spine at the sight of Han Li's cold gaze, and at the same time, he felt a sharp pain in his spiritual sense, which almost made him jump up from his seat. However, after Han Li turned and left, the sharp pain in his spiritual sense completely disappeared, as if it had just been a figment of his imagination. Elder Zimon was naturally very alarmed, and he hurriedly conducted a thorough examination of his own body with his spiritual sense, only to find that nothing was amiss. Elder Zimon was greatly relieved after making that discovery. It appeared that he had been excessively paranoid. After all, they were situated in the Star Palace right now, and even a great cultivator wouldn't dare to attack him. However, at the same time, he had made up his mind. As soon as this conference was over, he was going to find an obscure location to hide in and only emerge when the battle began. During this time, he was going to take extra care not to bump into Han Li in order to ensure his own safety. After all, that attack he had unleashed in the Heaven Void Hall all those years ago had almost taken Han Li's life, and now that Han Li was far more powerful than he was, it was very unlikely that he would simply be willing to let bygones be bygones. If he had known that Han Li would become so powerful, he would have either refrained from attacking him or made absolute sure that he was dead. Elder Zimon's heart was filled with remorse as he heaved an internal sigh. As soon as Han Li and Elder Zhao had left, Elder Ma turned to Ling Yuling with a skeptical expression and asked, "Palace Master, is that Han Li really going to be able to hold off Wan Tianming? And are we sure that he can be trusted? What if this man is actually allied with the Starfall Coalition, and he lends his assistance to them during the battle instead? If that happens, we'll be completely lost. Wouldn't it be safer to continue to guard Heavenly Star City through the use of our restriction?" "Don't worry, Elder Ma. I've known fellow Taoist Han even before he made the deal with my late parents. Even though we're not close friends, I know that he has a lot of bad blood with the Starfall Coalition due to the incidents surrounding the Heaven Void Cauldron many years ago, so there's no way that he would pledge his allegiance to them. As for whether he can actually hold off Wan Tianming, I'm confident in his ability to do so." After all, fellow Taoist Han reached the late nascent soul stage even earlier than Wan Tianming did, and he also has the Heaven Void Cauldron to assist him, so he should be the more powerful of the two great cultivators no matter how we look at it. Besides, do any of you have any better ideas? The restriction around our Heavenly Star City is indeed quite powerful, but it definitely won't be able to last for too long under the constant bombardment from the Heavenly Windfare Formation. We can't just take a passive approach and hope for the best. A decisive result has to be reached, and either the Starfall Coalition has to fall or our Star Palace will cease to exist, Ling Yuling replied in a firm voice. Elder Ma contemplated the situation for a while but was unable to provide any alternative tactics, so he could only reluctantly concede. If that's the case, then it seems we can only rely on that man. Elder Ma was the most disobedient and uncouth Star Palace elder by far, so Ling Yuling was quite pleased that even he had no objections to her proposed course of action. As such, she continued, "Let's discuss how we're going to attack the Starfall Coalition, and also how we're going to break their Heavenly Windfire Formation." Within a peaceful silent cultivation chamber, Han Li sat with his knees crossed and his eyes closed as he made a strange hand seal. After a long while, he suddenly stirred as he slowly opened his eyes. "Are you going to find that Elder Zimon now?" The endless sky beast's tender voice sounded beside his ears. "You know what I'm up to." Han Li remained expressionless, but his voice had become more grim. "I don't know exactly what secret technique you used, but you clearly used your spiritual sense to place a spiritual marker on that man before you left the hall. Even though that secret technique was nothing special, the power of your spiritual sense ensures that none of the cultivators in the palace would have been able to detect what you were doing. I'm assuming you didn't place the spiritual marker on that man so you could invite him out for a meal, right?" The demon beast chuckled. "Seeing as you already know everything, then there's nothing for me to deny. That man almost took my life in the Heaven Void Hall. I'm not a petty person, but I can't just forgive a man who tried to kill me. It would have been difficult for me to kill him in that stone palace, but he's left the palace now, so it's time for me to strike," Han Li admitted with a cold smile. He patted the storage pouch hanging from his waist, and silver light flashed as the humanoid puppet soundlessly appeared. It then hovered toward a nearby wall before disappearing in a flash. After that, Han Li rose to his feet and pushed open the door of the silent cultivation chamber before making his way outside. After passing through a short corridor, Han Li arrived in a large hall. Elder Zhao was seated and sipping on some tea, and he was rather surprised to Han Li emerge from the chamber. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face as he said, "Elder Zhao, you're using a wood attribute cultivation art as well, right? If you don't mind, would you be willing to discuss cultivation experiences and insights with me?" Half a day later, a certain soul lamp in a restricted area of the Star Palace was suddenly snuffed out. The Star Palace disciple looking after the lamps was given a massive fright, and he hurriedly reported this matter to the higher-ups of the sect. The entire Star Palace plunged into turmoil, and not long after that, several Star Palace elders broke into a secret chamber in Elder Ximon's cave abode. Several hours ago, there were disciples who had personally witnessed Elder Ximon entering that secret chamber. However, the chamber was now completely empty. Even if he had actually passed away, as the dimming of the soul lamp suggested, there was no body to be found. The higher-ups of the Star Palace were almost sure that this had something to do with Han Li. After all, they had all seen the interaction between Elder Ximon and Han Li in the Stone Palace. Anyone could tell that this great cultivator had a vendetta against Elder Ximon. However, despite their suspicions, all of the Star Palace elders simply pretended to not suspect anything, and none of them went to interrogate Han Li. He was a great cultivator whom no one wanted to mess with, and most importantly, they couldn't find any evidence that Han Li was the culprit behind all this. Instead, there was strong evidence suggesting that he hadn't actually been responsible for this incident. During the time period in which Elder Ximon had perished, Han Li had been discussing cultivation insights and experiences with Elder Zhao the entire time. Of course, it wasn't difficult to tell that this was a smokescreen intentionally set up by Han Li to prevent anyone from being able to aim a convincing accusation against him. Despite knowing the truth, it was still an extremely harrowing notion to all of the Star Palace elders that Han Li could wipe a nascent soul cultivator off the face of the world, without even having to go after him in person. If he were a normal cultivator, they could naturally disregard all evidence and capture him before using a soul search technique to confirm everything. However, who would dare to do that to a late nascent soul great cultivator? Even the elders who had been quite close with Elder Ximon knew better than to kick up a fuss. Furthermore, the Star Palace had to rely on Han Li's powers to carry them through this crisis, so they absolutely couldn't afford to get on his bad side. Thus, Ling Yuling and all of the Star Palace elders could only pretend that they had no idea who the culprit could be. After discussing cultivation experiences and insights with Elder Zhao for about half a day, Han Li returned to his silent cultivation chamber. Almost immediately thereafter, Elder Zhao received news that Elder Ximon had passed away, and he was rooted to the spot for a long while. In the end, he could only give a wry smile with a resigned expression on his face. After that, he departed from the cave abode, and left 2 core formation disciples there in his place. Han Li could kill a nascent soul cultivator even without leaving the cave abode, so it was just a waste of time for him to remain behind and keep an eye on Han Li anyway. It was much wiser for him to get out of there as soon as possible in case Han Li decided to kill him as well. As such, a peculiar sequence of events unfolded. A Star Palace elder had clearly just perished, yet this incident was completely glossed over, and it seemed that none of the higher-ups of the Star Palace wanted to mention anything about it. Even the words Elder Ximon had become a taboo phrase that could only be mentioned in hushed whispers. Instead, everyone was focusing their attention on making preparations for the upcoming battle. 5 days later, Han Li emerged from the silent cultivation chamber and arrived at the sacred palace again. On this occasion, there were more than 30 core formation cultivators also gathered here on top of the Star Palace elders. Most of these cultivators were at the late core formation stage, so their powers were only just below that of the Star Palace elders. When Han Li slowly made his way into the hall, all of the cultivators turned their attention to him in unison. Most of them wore expressions of awe and veneration, while some were quite fearful of his arrival. However, one thing remained constant, and that was no matter which direction Han Li cast his gaze toward. All of the cultivators gathered there would immediately lower their heads and avoid his gaze. Using his humanoid puppet to take care of an early nascent soul cultivator was an extremely simple task for Han Li, but in doing so, he had intimidated the entire Star Palace. In the past, all of these Star Palace cultivators only knew that Han Li was a great cultivator, but no one had seen him in action, so they couldn't help but be skeptical about whether he would actually be able to hold off Wan Tianming. After all, Wan Tianming had slain many Star Palace elders in the past several decades, and his reputation was second to none in the scattered star seas. Ironically, Han Li's assassination of a nascent soul elder instilled everyone with a lot more confidence in his abilities. That was something that neither Han Li nor Ling Yuling had anticipated. Of course, Ling Yuling was naturally very glad that their morale had been boosted, while Han Li simply didn't care. "Please take a seat, fellow Taoist Han. I'll start organizing the preparations for the upcoming battle right away," Ling Yuling said in a respectful voice. Han Li nodded as he took a seat before producing a white jade slip to read, completely ignoring everyone else in the process. Ling Yuling merely smiled upon seeing this, but her expression instantly became quite grave after turning to the rest of the cultivators and delivering a series of instructions. Even though most of Han Li's attention was focused on the jade slip, he wouldn't actually completely ignore what Ling Yuling was saying. The Star Palace's plan was very simple. Even though the Heavenly Windfare Formation was comprised of 108 Windfare Pillars, they were only planning to attack the 36 Windfare Pillars surrounding Heavenly Star City. According to the analysis from several of the Star Palace's formation spell masters, these 36 pillars were the most important ones, and as long as they could destroy most of those pillars, the formation would be vanquished as a result. Of course, the formation core that Wan Tianming was guarding had to be conquered by the Star Palace before that. Thus, one nascent soul stage elder and core formation cultivator after another rose to their feet at Ling Yuling's behest, and all of them wore serious expressions as they listened to the duties being delegated to them. A sense of fierce killing intent had spread through the entire hall. Before long, all of the cultivators present had been assigned to attack a certain windfire pillar. However, the distribution of high-grade cultivators was rather uneven. There were 2 or 3 nascent soul cultivators in some groups, while in others, there wasn't even a single nascent soul cultivator. Han Li was rather surprised by this arrangement. However, he quickly understood why such arrangements had been made. There were most likely Star Palace spies in the Starfall Coalition as well, so they must have already ascertained the forces guarding each individual windfare pillar, and were delegating troops accordingly. Letter 1D627, letter 1D4C7, letter 212F, letter 212F, letter 1D464, letter 212F, letter 1D623, letter 1D450, letter 1D630, letter 1D45A. Even though Han Li continued to focus his attention on his jade slip, a faint smile had appeared on his face. Ling Yuling delegated duties very quickly, and after just a short while, almost all of the cultivators in the hall had been assigned with specific roles. Finally, her voice faltered as she turned to Han Li, and a smile appeared on her face as she said, "Fellow Taoist Han, you, Elder Zhao, Elder Ma, and I will be responsible for attacking the formation core that's being guarded by Wan Tianming. Is that all right?" Han Li raised his head and replied nonchalantly, "Sure. However, I'm only responsible for taking on Wan Tianming. I won't attack any other cultivators unless they attack me." A hint of surprise appeared in her eyes at the sight of Han Li's carefree expression, but she was naturally quite glad that Han Li had accepted her arrangement. Even though she had heard some things about Han Li from the Heavenly Star Sages, she didn't actually know if Han Li was all that powerful among late nascent soul cultivators. She was really worried that Han Li would underestimate his enemy and fall on his own sword, so she elaborated on some of Wan Tianming's signature abilities and treasures in order to help Han Li prepare for the upcoming battle. Han Li's expression remained quite nonchalant as he listened to her description. Ling Yuling could only heave an internal sigh upon seeing this, and she repressed the urge to ask Han Li what chance he thought he had of victory. In any case, defeat was not an option for the Star Palace. "Let's go." After one final instruction, all of the cultivators in the palace instantly rushed out from within. All of the low-grade Foundation establishment disciples had already gathered at all 4 of Heavenly Star City's gates, and they were primed to attack as soon as the core formation cultivators arrived to lead them into battle. Han Li glanced at the jade slip in his hand before closing his palms together, upon which the jade slip abruptly disappeared. The jade slip contained the cultivation art for the divine essence effused light, and it was indeed quite profound and complex. Even after several days of arduous observation, he had only made a little progress. He was very curious about just what kind of extraordinary existence the divine essence effused mountain was to be able to assist in the mastery of this cultivation art. Han Li was considering these matters in a rather absent-minded manner, as he also exited the stone palace along with the other elders. Much to Han Li's surprise, there was a massive carriage over 100 feet in length parked outside the palace. The entire carriage had been constructed from some type of unidentifiable green wood, and all types of runes had been carved onto its surface. It was quite apparent that this was an extremely intricately and painstakingly crafted carriage. However, what was even more noteworthy was that the carriage was being drawn by 4 demon beasts several tens of feet in length, all of which were of the same green color as the carriage itself. This was the first time that Han Li had been flabbergasted following his arrival in Heavenly Star City. The 4 green demon beasts only appeared to be at the 5th or 6th grade, but they were most definitely flood dragons. If he recalled correctly, flood dragons were extremely protective of their brethren. The Star Palace was indeed very powerful, but how could they use actual flood dragons to draw their carriages? Weren't they afraid of drawing the ire of the entire flood dragon race and bringing disaster to the Star Palace? At the sight of rare expression of surprise that had appeared on Han Li's face, Ling Yuling smiled and asked, "Is there really a need to be so surprised by a few low-grade demon beasts, fellow Taoist Han?" A blue light flashed through Han Li's eyes, and he suddenly said, "Wait, these demon beasts possess the bodies of true flood dragons, but their souls seem to be rather strange." A hint of admiration appeared in Ling Yuling's eye as she explained, "You really do have a good eye, Brother Han. The souls in the bodies of these demon beasts are indeed not the souls of flood dragons. Many years ago, when my father was traveling through the outer seas, he won a few low-grade green flood dragon carcasses from the Golden Worm King in a bet, then used a secret technique to inject the souls of marine spirit pythons into their bodies, thereby creating these demon beasts." "I see, but why have you placed this carriage here? Will we be using it in our attack?" Han Li's brows were still furrowed with confusion. You won't be aware of this, Brother Han, but this carriage was personally crafted by my father. Aside from these demon beasts, the carriage itself is also very special and will be quite effective against our enemies. If it weren't for the importance of this battle, I wouldn't even be using such a precious treasure." Ling Yuling raised her eyebrows as a mysterious look appeared on her face. When Han Li heard Ling Yuling, he swept his spiritual sense past the carriage beasts and nodded, saying little else. Its driver was a bald 2-meter-tall giant drove it. Although he only possessed foundation establishment cultivation, his upper body was bare and revealed steel-like muscles, giving him a menacing aura. When everyone boarded the carriage, the large man raised a white whip and cracked it. The green flood dragons that were lazily resting in front of the stone hall quickly raised themselves and began to slither in the air. The carriage then launched into the air in a white streak, traveling at a speed that rivaled an early nascent soul cultivator. A quarter-hour later, Han Li and company arrived above a gate at Heavenly Star City. Letter 1D4F, letter 1D667, letter 1D65A, letter 1D486, letter 1D66C, letter 1D65A, letter 1D658, letter 1D664, letter 1D662. At that moment, the power of windfire was bombarding the blue light barrier relentlessly. Even with the protection of the light barrier, the muffled explosions trembled throughout the city, startling mortals and low-grade vagrant cultivators alike. Although the light barrier appeared quite durable, under the sustained attack of the grand formation outside, it was only a matter of time before the barrier broke. As Han Li stood outside a desolate city gate, he examined the situation on the outside of the island. The situation appeared far from good. It was about the same as when he entered. All he could see was azure and red. Even with his vast abilities, he couldn't see far past it. He indifferently glanced down at the city and saw thousands of low-grade cultivators hiding behind the other city gates nearby. They were either meditating while sitting cross-legged or preparing magic tools and talismans, making their final preparations. Old Man Zhao and the large purple-robed man then walked out of the carriage. They were talking with the other elders with a grave expression. Footsteps sounded from behind him, and before he turned his head, he heard a sweet voice speak to him. "Brother Han, I have a request for you. I don't know if you would be willing to accept." "What is it?" Han Li turned around, showing not the slightest surprise on his face. Ling Yuling stood behind him wearing faint green palace robes. Her beautiful face wore an unclear expression, and her brow was tensed as if she were discussing something of great importance. Ling Yuling gritted her teeth and produced a faint blue jade slip, handing it towards Han Li with a hopeful gaze. The next battle will decide the life and death of our Star Palace. To tell the truth, the Starfall Coalition attracted a few cultivators that previously remained hidden in bitter cultivation. Even with Brother Han's assistance, our chances of victory are only half. If we win this battle, we won't further trouble you, but if we were to suffer a grand defeat, I hope you will be able to take the people listed in the Jade slip away from the scattered star seas. I hope you'll consider it. What do you mean by that? Han Li frowned. It's nothing much. The people I listed are closely related to me. Although I am confident no one knows the relationships between us, there is still a possibility the Starfall Coalition will exterminate them if we are defeated. It would be much better if you were to take them with you. You aren't a cultivator from the scattered star seas. You should be capable of doing this. Ling Yuling spoke with a tone of complete trust. Han Li looked at her in silence. As his silence continued, she misunderstood. She smiled and said, "Of course, if you do this for me, it will fulfill your agreement with my father to act 3 times. You've already fulfilled a part of the agreement by dealing with Wan Tianming. If you agree to this matter, the agreement will be fulfilled even if we win, and you don't have to take action." After another moment of silence, an odd gaze appeared in Han Li's eyes and he said, "Fellow Taoist Ling, please consider this carefully. My agreement with your father was to save you 3 times when your life was in danger. Don't you think that using one of these requests like this is against the intentions of the 2 sages? I am well aware, but I am the Star Palace Lord now. If we are truly defeated in this battle, the Star Palace's ancient legacy will be extinguished as a result. What use are 2 extra chances at life? It would be better for my close relatives to be saved. As for my own protection, my mid-nascent soul cultivation should be enough." Han Li looked at her lovely pitiful expression for a long while before replying with an emotionless tone, "Fine. In that case, I will accept your request. If you lose this battle, I will bring them away from the scattered star seas." With beauty blossoming from her face, Ling Yuling charmingly said, "Your words leave me without worry for the future. With your amazing abilities, you will be able to make it out safely no matter how badly this war turns out." Han Li smiled, and then turned his gaze to outside the city. With Ling Yuling acquiring Han Li's agreement, she tactfully left him alone and withdrew. Several hours later, voice transmission talismans were sent out notifying that preparations were complete and the gates to Heavenly Star City were opened. Tens of thousands of cultivators rushed out at the same time, quickly leaving the city's blue barrier and disappearing into the azure and red mist formed from windfare. Heavenly Star Palace's massive deployment was instantly discovered by the Starfall Coalition cultivators that were assigned to protect the formation. The Starfall Coalition immediately deployed large numbers of cultivators to fight, and had their retainers immediately control the Grand Formation, fully activating the formation's might. Although the spell formation didn't have any effect on cultivators above Foundation Establishment, it could produce grave injuries to anyone at Foundation Establishment and below. After the various windfire pillars were activated, the azure red mist that was slowly floating in the air began to violently turn, condensing into azure red balls of light and promptly exploding. For a time, light flashed within the Grand Formation, followed by sounds of unceasing explosions. If common Foundation Establishment cultivators were to enter the formation without any preparations, they would have been immediately torn apart by the power of windfire. But for this battle, the Star Palace made meticulous preparations. Each and every cultivator had various colored light barriers appearing on their bodies, warding off the attacks of windfire and preventing any significant injuries to the low-grade Star Palace cultivators. At that moment, the Starfall Coalition cultivators guarding the pillars met the Star Palace cultivators head-on. The sounds of battle and death immediately sounded from the formation. At nearly the same time at the edge of the Grand Formation, at the very top of a giant kilometer-tall pillar of wind flame, several cultivators were staring into the distance. Their leader, a middle-aged man with a tense squarish face, wore a purple robe and a jade band. He held his hands behind his back. He was Wan Tianming. His current calm demeanor was far different from when Han Li had seen him last. Standing not far behind him was an old man with dark skin and an old woman with red and green clothing. The 2 wore similarly grave expressions. It seems the Star Palace is truly launching a full-force attack. They used so many mid-grade talismans in this very attack that it could bankrupt an ordinary clan. The dark old man muttered. This was the cultivator surnamed Long, who escaped in a panic when Han Li rushed the formation. They must be staking it all in one throw. This must be related to the person who rushed into the city, Wan Tianming calmly said. I see it as a desperate move. However, fellow Taoist Long is the cultivator who killed fellow Taoist Hua so fearsome. Even with you two united, this fellow was still able to kill one of you in an instant. Green light flashed from the old woman's eyes as she looked at the old man. She possessed mid-nascent soul cultivation. An old man Long heard the woman mention Han Li. His face turned pale and stroked the new arm he produced from a secret technique. A long while later, he replied with a wry smile, more than just fearsome. Fellow Taoist Hua was by no means weak, but he wasn't able to put up much resistance. Had I been any slower in escaping, I feared I wouldn't be standing here today. He most likely isn't a mid-nascent soul cultivator, but a late-nascent soul grand cultivator. A sneer appeared on the old woman's face, and she bluntly said, a grand cultivator. I see that fellow Taoist Long has been frightened to the extent where his mind became muddled. Apart from fellow Taoist Mo, how can there be other late-nascent soul cultivators from the inner seas? The Star Palace would have already recruited them otherwise, and whittle away at our alliance after such a long period of time. Old man Long's face grimaced as a result. Wan Tianming faintly smiled. That isn't certain. The image of the cultivator that fellow Taoist Long produced for me is somewhat familiar. After several days, I came to recognize the person. It is someone that fellow Taoist Q should know as well. Oh, could Brother Mo explain? The old woman asked in astonishment. Do you remember when the heaven-void cauldron emerged into the world several hundreds of years ago? When our alliance issued a kill order on a cultivator named Han Li? Wan Tianming leisurely asked. After a short moment of thought, she came to an instant realization. The heaven-void cauldron, that Han Li, was that the person who broke through the formation. Yi, they do bear a strong resemblance, but how can this be possible? That person was a core formation cultivator in the past. She shook her head, wearing an expression of disbelief. Wan Tianming looked in the direction of the grand formation and indifferently said, you don't need to be so surprised. Over 100 years ago, before the death of the heavenly star sages, I acquired a secret report that Han Li appeared near the Yellow Sand Sect as a nascent soul cultivator. Then, he used a Star Palace teleportation formation to the outer seas. At that time, the Star Palace sages attempted to recruit him, but to little success. I suspect that the disappearance of Swift Crane and other elders of our alliance are largely related to him. Elder Swift Crane and Fire Dragon Island's Huang Kun, they didn't die from a demon beast ambush at Green Spirit Island, the old woman said with a start. Wan Tianming coldly chuckled and slowly explained. That is what we say to outsiders. In truth, according to our cultivators on Green Spirit Island, the two elders never made an appearance on the island on the day of the demon beast invasion. Rather, there were people from Lightning Sky Island that reported a sighting of Han Li on the same day that Swift Crane and Huang Kun mysteriously disappeared. Their life soul tokens in the Alliance's possession were also extinguished. As for the demon beast invasion of Green Spirit Island, that was an unrelated affair that occurred after. The old woman remained stunned for a while and slowly said, even if that is the case, those two were partners to the death. Would it have been a difficult task? It is true, we have no evidence that he was the one who did it. But if the cultivator who broke through the formation was truly Han Li, and he possesses the ability of a grand cultivator, then that guess should mostly be correct. A cold light glinted from Wan Tianming's eyes, and his voice turned gloomy. If this person truly reached late nascent soul stage and has the heaven-void cauldron in his possession, and Brother Wan also only became a late nascent soul cultivator recently. As old man Long muttered this, worry was betrayed on his face. Wan Tianming chuckled and spoke unperturbed. Since I know this person, how could I not have a plan to respond? Be at ease. If he arrives, leave him to me. I won't say that I have complete certainty to kill him, but I am confident I will defeat him. The two elders exchanged a glance and betrayed astonishment from their faces, but relief soon appeared on their faces. Since this was said by the sect leader of a grand sect, his words should hold true. If you're saying that, then we are assured. We'll deal with the others. The old woman wore a sinister smile. Wan Tianming eventually turned around and wore an odd expression on his face. I will feel at ease to hand over the ordinary problems and the formation core to you two fellow Taoists. But do you plan on fighting with your backs against the wall? There will be many high-grade cultivators targeting the formation core. As such, I will request for assistance to help you two defend the formation core." Startled, the old man yelped, "Assistance, you mean?" Wan Tianming didn't directly reply, but rather raised his hand, releasing a giant fireball from his sleeve. It ruptured high in the air in a flourish of vermilion flame. This eye-catching scene was noticed by all the cultivators nearby the huge pillar, arousing some discussion amongst them. As these people were bewildered, something happened above them. A charming voice spoke from a 10-meter long that appeared. "Brother, fellow Taoist Wan has summoned us. It seems the time has come to make use of us. It was truly boring hiding here for such a long amount of time. Time has little meaning to cultivators like ourselves. Since Brother Wan had us reveal ourselves, it seems the time for battle has come, and no small one by any means. We should be able to kill enough this time around." A deep man's voice spoke from the boat. Soon after, two blinding white streaks shot off from the boat, circling once in the air and landing on top of the huge pillar. The white light vanished in a flash, revealing a male and female cultivator in front of Wan Tianming and company. The man had round eyes, long hair drooped over his face, and a tall, sturdy body. The woman had pale, soft flesh and an exquisite body, the makings of a seductive appearance. After a brief moment of alarm, Old Man Long recognized the two that appeared and couldn't help but cry out in terror, the twin land devils. Even the overbearing old woman's complexion turned pale. The dainty woman glanced at Old Man Long and gorgeously smiled. "Oh, I didn't think that there were still people that recognized us in the scattered star seas. We've lived in seclusion at Devil Sin Island for many years." The old woman briefly hesitated and spoke with a fearful expression. "Weren't you two exterminated by the heavenly star sages? How can you be here?" "It is true that in the past we were nearly done in by those two old bastards, but through some luck, we're managed to make it out here today." "What? You don't mean to say you have some sort of grudge against us?" The large man swept a cold gaze past the two elders. Strangely enough, his lips moved, but his voice came from his abdomen, revealing a set of glinting white teeth from there, as if there were a man embedded inside. The old woman's heart trembled at the sight of this, and she unconsciously took a step back. Soon after, she realized she was showing weakness and couldn't help but step back forward, letting out a resentful snort. The large man sinisterly grinned in response and released waves of baleful qi from his body, covering his face in a layer of faint blood qi. Wan Tianming snorted and sullenly said, "Enough, our enemy has arrived. Fellow Taoists, I had you remain hidden until today for this very battle. Humph, did you think I didn't notice that the Star Palace had a spy infiltrate the higher ranks of our alliance? Now let's see who has fallen into our trap." The others startled and quickly turned their heads in the direction of the spell formation. They saw a violent storm of windfire in wide the azure-red mist. Inside it was a huge carriage being pulled by 4 green flood dragons. Countless cultivators followed after it, and in a blink of an eye, several thousand cultivators could be seen. The star-defying alliance cultivators nearby the pillar had long prepared for this moment. When they saw enemies approach, they flew into the air on their flying tools. Soon, the two sides found themselves in confrontation at the huge pillar of wind flame. The old woman and old man long paid no further heed to the land devils, focusing instead on the Star Palace cultivators in front of them, particularly on the 4 cultivators riding the carriage. When the old man saw this, his heart trembled and mouth turned dry. He saw a confidently posed Han Li inside the carriage. At that moment, Han Li hadn't taken notice of the old man. Rather, his eyes immediately fell on Wan Tianming and examined him with a sharp gaze. The twin land devils. The large purple-robed man let out a yelp similar to Old Man Long. Han Li didn't react to the name, but Ling Yuling and Old Man Ko were strongly startled. Ling Yuling asked with an urgent tone, "Elder Ma, are you not mistaken? Weren't the land devils exterminated long ago by my esteemed mother and father?" "How could I be mistaken? I followed the 2 palace lords when they personally pursued the 2 devils after such a long period of time. After that, the 2 palace lords jointly advanced to late nascent soul stage." Absolutely baffling. If the 2 devils truly managed to survive, they should have already reached the end of their lifespans. How could they have survived until now? However, their cultivation was about the same as in the past, in the realm of mid-nascent soul stage. Obvious confusion appeared on the large man's face. Letter 1D65B, letter 1D4FB, letter 1D486, letter 1D486, letter 1D498, letter 1D65A, letter 1D658, letter 1D664, letter 1D662. "That isn't anything strange," Han Li explained. I know of several medicines that can extend one's lifespan well over 200 years. It is possible for them to have consumed one if they were lucky. That is the only possibility. In any case, the two devils were just as famous as the Star Palace lords in the past. The sheer mention of their name could turn people pale. The man is fond of killing and once slaughtered 2 small islands overnight, laying waste to 1,000 cultivators and over 100,000 mortals. The woman cultivates the renowned womanly yang pilfering art. She is particularly fond of extracting the life essence of young male cultivators and sadistically killing them. After the two reached mid-nascent soul stage, they became inseparable. United, they can survive against even late-nascent soul cultivators. Were it not for the Star Palace lords taking the risk to fight them, I fear they would be running rampant today. With gloomy complexion, Elder Kao gave Han Li a rough explanation. Han Li stroked his chin and said, "So it was like that. It seems they've prepared this for a while. Even if I battle with Wan Tianming, you don't have a high chance of victory with those two present." Ling Yuling grimaced. "In truth, I originally thought to suppress them with overwhelming force with the elders that I've brought with me. But now that these two fearsome characters appeared, I fear it will take all our power to not be defeated. A stalemate would be a good result." Han Li smiled, but before he could speak, a person from the giant pillar began to slowly fly towards them. As soon as he saw him, he shut his mouth and coldly glared at him. The person flying towards them was Wan Tianming. Wan Tianming flew to the middle before he paused and smiled at Han Li. "Fellow Taoist Han, I didn't think that your cultivation would make such progress in becoming a grand cultivator since we last met in Heaven Void Hall. And if I'm correct, you aren't a person from the scattered star seas. Why are you taking part in the battle between our alliance and the Star Palace? How about this? Regardless of what that girl pledged you, I will double whatever price. And I won't even need you to do anything, so long as you agree not to fight in this war." When those from the Star Palace heard this, their expressions massively changed. Han Li was shocked. "Double the price? Fellow Taoist Wan is truly generous." Han Li laughed and wore a mysterious smile on his face. "Do you feel it isn't enough?" Wan Tianming asked with a calm tone. "Oh, it's enough, plenty enough. It is a pity that I am fighting this war due to a promise I made many years ago, and I'm not fond of breaking my promises. But if you were to peacefully withdraw, I'll consider your offer for the next time." Han Li lazily replied with a clear mocking tone. These words left the cultivators on both sides flabbergasted. Wan Tianming's smile disappeared to be replaced with a gloomy expression. "Since Brother Han has made his decision, then we will have test our might. However, our battle will bring disaster to our juniors nearby. Wouldn't it be better to fight somewhere farther?" Wan Tianming said icily. "Yes, I had that in mind as well." Han Li promptly agreed without the slightest consideration. This had surprised Wan Tianming, but after he gloomily examined Han Li, he held his hands in an incantation gesture and turned into a purple streak, flying in the direction of Heavenly Star City. Han Li turned around and took a glance at Ling Yuling and the others. He nodded with a smile and closely followed after him in an azure streak. In the blink of an eye, the two late-nascent soul cultivators tore through the air and disappeared out of sight. Ling Yuling and Old Man Kao exchanged a glance, both revealing a trace of worry from their faces. Wan Tianming had already known about Han Li's existence and took the initiative to challenge him to a fight. Could it be he had another plan in mind? However, Han Li didn't hesitate in following him. This only added to their apprehension, as dissuading him would only damage their morale. The man from the land devils extended a scarlet tongue and licked his lips before letting out a bewildering cackle. "He, since fellow Taoist Wan is gone, it's time to take action. Let's see how your abilities stand up, Junior. It's been several hundred years since I've killed a nascent soul-grade cultivator." Afterward, he held his hands in an incantation gesture and spouted out a white bone band. At that same time, a blood mist was released from his body, filling the nearby 100 meters in an instant. Ghost shrieks loudly wailed from within it as it moved to engulf the Star Palace cultivators. Following that, the dainty woman at the large man's side let out a giggle of ecstasy and waved her sleeve, producing a fragrant pink fog. Those who smelled it would lose their sense of self. Old Man Long and the old woman exchanged a glance before spitting out a golden ball and 13 green blades respectively before sending it off in an attack. When the Star Palace cultivators saw this, they didn't dare to delay and made use of their own abilities, releasing their light in return. Several of the Star Palace's early nascent soul cultivators met the attacks of the mid-nascent soul stage land devils. Various lights met the devilish chi, followed by violent explosions. The attacks found themselves in a deadlock. When the lower-grade cultivators saw this, they all shouted and rallied themselves, releasing their own magic tools and treasures as they charged forward, officially starting the melee. Of course, these cultivators all kept their distance from the battles of the nascent soul-grade cultivators taking place at the center. For a time, sounds of explosions and murder filled the air. The chaos prevented anyone from seeing which side had the advantage, and it was clear the battle wouldn't end anytime soon. Meanwhile, Han Li and Wan Tianming turned to streaks of light and traveled nearly 500 kilometers in a single breath before eventually coming to a stop. Han Li appeared from the azure light and observed him with his hands behind his back, not the slightest expression betrayed from his face. With his vast spiritual sense as of current, he could tell if there were any cultivators hiding nearby. He wouldn't have allowed Wan Tianming to lead him otherwise. After sweeping his spiritual sense in a radius of 50 kilometers, he found nobody, nor did he find any spell formation or restrictions. When he glanced again at Wan Tianming, he saw a calm expression on his face. As thoughts churned in his mind, he found the situation quite funny. It appeared Wan Tianming was the same as himself, with complete trust in their combat abilities. Wan Tianming looked around him before turning his gaze back to Han Li. With a demeanor similar to an iceberg, he coldly said, "This should be far enough. If we use this as your gravesite, it shouldn't disgrace your status as a grand cultivator." "My gravesite?" Han Li remained unshaken and simply smiled. Wan Tianming snorted and asked, "What? Do you feel that I am talking too highly of myself? Letter 1D667, letter 1D65A, letter 1D65A, letter 1D500, letter 1D486, letter 1D4EB, letter 1D484, letter 1D664, letter 1D4F6. Han Li chuckled unperturbed and leisurely said, "No, I only feel that there is something amiss with your recent cultivation. You might have progressed your magic power so quickly that you damaged your head. We'll see if my words hold true when I scatter your soul. But before that, there are two people I wish to introduce to you." Han Li coldly smiled and replied with a blunt tone, "Do you think I am a child? There is no one here apart from you and me. I'll have your head and give it to you as a gift." Wan Tianming narrowed his eyes. "Is that so? Then it is my mistake. These two aren't considered people after all." With that said, he didn't wait for Han Li to respond. He took a black leather pouch at his waist and tossed it into his air. Then with his hands in an incantation gesture, he began to chant. Suddenly the bag opened itself, spitting out a black mist. A tall and a skinny silhouette appeared there, drifting erratically in the mist as if they were ghosts. "Refined corpses," Han Li frowned. As experienced as he was, he immediately recognized the mist before him to be an extremely potent corpse chi. Wan Tianming coldly smiled when he heard it and cast a spell seal. The two silhouettes raised their arms, absorbing the nearby corpse chi in great force, turning the mist into snakes that burrowed into their bodies. In the blink of an eye, the black corpse chi disappeared and the corpses' true faces were revealed. Han Li glanced at the two corpses with indifference. This was to be expected. He was rather unfamiliar with the appearance of these corpses. Of the two corpses, one was tall and had a tense expression. It appeared over 40 years of age, but its arms had an extra extension and reached down to its knees. Its palms were exceptionally large as well, and they sparkled as if they were carved from fine white jade. The smaller, refined corpse was a woman of about 30 years. She had a slim face, deep eyes, and a rough brow. One of her shoulders had 3 differently styled swords nailed into it, creating a warped appearance. When Wan Tianming saw Han Li disregard the 2 refined corpses, a harsh expression appeared on his face. He took a deep breath and his hand gesture changed. Suddenly, frightful sounds of breaking bones snapped from his body, and he promptly grew several inches. He then opened his mouth and violently spouted out mists of purple chi, enveloping himself in a 10-meter-wide cloud in the blink of an eye. Soon after, the cloud fiercely turned and began to shine of ever-changing colors. When Han Li saw this, he stroked his chin and he broke into a smirk. He dropped his hands, summoning a 3-colored fiery streak from one of them and a green light from the other. Han Li remained indifferent. His plan was to use pure force and a full-powered assault to beat down the enemy, no matter what methods they used. First, he would use the 8th Spirit Ruler to trap him, and then approach closer to him, finishing him off with a full-powered attack of the Triflame Fan. Having thought that, blue light flickered from his eyes and muffled thunder rang from his back, summoning a pair of azure-white wings. Just as he thought to use his wings to approach him, he was stunned by what he witnessed. His appearance completely changed within the cloud, and the sounds of snapping bones came to a stop. Afterward, astonishing devilish chi pressured the air, and the cloud turned sinisterly gray and icy cold. Han Li's pupils narrowed and his heart thumped. Wasn't Wan Tianming the sect master of the myriad gates of enlightenment? How could he cultivate devil Dao arts? Rather, this devilish chi was quite familiar and was somewhat similar to the elder devil's true devil chi. Soon, something came to mind, but he couldn't fully recall as he wasn't in a position to take his time. As Han Li was bewildered, a series of wild laughs echoed from the devilish chi as a silhouette warped in front of him. Behind this person was 6 distinct phantoms that appeared solid, each with a horn on their head or fangs. All of them were frightening to the eye and had scales on their body, appearing like the devils that once appeared in this world. "The 6 apex devils' art," Han Li cried out. "Oh, you recognize this Lord's devil art. You aren't so stupid after all." His laughter came to a stop, and he coldly looked at Han Li with an attitude of complete arrogance, derision clear on his face. He still wore Wan Tianming's clothes, but his face was completely different. When Han Li saw his face, he couldn't help but betray his shock. Han Li turned his gaze, and he looked at the face of the tall, refined corpse. Then he looked at the man wearing Wan Tianming's clothes before letting out a long sigh. Apart from their stature, their faces looked entirely the same. "Should I call you Wan Tianming or Archsaint Six Paths?" Han Li blinked and wore a grave expression. "You figured out who I am." Wan Tianming coldly snorted. The movement of his body caused the 6 devil phantoms behind him to tremble. "To the best of my knowledge, the 6 apex devils' art is the greatest devil Dao art in the scattered star seas, and only you could have cultivated it to this degree. It seems you've somehow managed to survive during that time, but there are a few things that I don't understand. How did you seize Wan Tianming's body, and how did you transform into his likeness? Why does this refined corpse resemble you? Could it be an incarnation you cultivated, or did you refine your own body into a corpse devil?" As Han Li slowly spoke, he regained his calm demeanor. Archsaint Six Paths sinisterly laughed. "Why should I answer a dead man?" Soon after, his shoulders trembled and 2 of the 6 phantoms from behind him shot towards 2 of the refined corpses. The 2 refined corpses suddenly trembled, and they stiffly opened their eyes, revealing them completely stained dark green. Archsaint Six Paths continued, chanting a cryptic and profound incantation, causing the somewhat shriveled corpses to be engulfed in gray devilish chi. The 2 corpses let out a piercing shriek, and their bodies massively grew. In the blink of an eye, their bodies expanded to 15 meters in height as they groaned in agony. One of the corpses had a body that was jet black with large copper scales. It had a pair of sharp antelope horns and a long azure tail that slightly waved. The other corpse had its body covered in blood-red bone spokes. Silver light shined from its limbs as if cast from silver. Its triangular head bore a sinister appearance with 4 slender dark green eyes. After their transformation, the 2 refined corpses appeared completely similar to the 2 devil phantoms that entered their bodies. But shockingly, they now possessed a true physical form. When Han Li saw this, his heart trembled. Archsaint Six Paths wildly laughed. "When the 6 apex devils' art is cultivated to its peak, it can summon the true devil sage's soul fragments to possess a body, rendering them abilities that could rival a deity transformation cultivator in battle. It was only there was never human in the mortal world that ever cultivated to that stage. Even so, the 2 devils I've summoned each possess the ability of a late nascent soul cultivator. Now that you are outnumbered, do you believe that you can keep your life?" With a command of his spiritual sense, the 2 devils floating in front of him suddenly vanished from sight. The space 3 meters in front of Han Li warped, followed by the bizarre appearance of the 2 devils. The horned devil shot towards Han Li's abdomen in an azure streak at lightning speed. The spiked devil remained still as its body trembled, the sounds of explosions echoing nearby. Dense foot-long crimson bone spikes filled the air as they shot towards Han Li in an enveloping barrage. At such a close distance, such a momentous attack could not be avoided. It appeared Archsaint Six Paths had the same plan in mind as Han Li, to destroy their opponent in a single blow with overwhelming force. A trace of pride and confidence was written on the Archsaint's face. He believed that even if Han Li managed to somehow survive this flawless joint attack, he wouldn't make it out unscathed. But in that next moment, the old devil's expression froze. Just as the horned devil's charge and the bone-spike barrage was about to tear apart Han Li, The azure-white wings on Han Li's back flapped, summoning a huge gust. Following that, his body faded from sight. The azure streak and the bone spikes passed through empty space. Startled, Archsaint Six Paths quickly looked around him. But before he could release his spiritual sense around him, azure lightning flashed from above the horned devil's head, followed by Han Li's reappearance. He wordlessly raised his hand and released an azure ruler below him where it soon blurred. A foot-wide silver lotus suddenly appeared beneath the horned devil. The lotus simply spun once before seven-colored Buddhist light rushed out from the lotus, holding the horned devil rigidly in place and freezing the devilish chi in its body. Han Li expressionlessly raised his other hand, now summoning a fan covered in three-colored flame. Before he commanded it to take any action, its fearsome spiritual power pervaded the air. At that moment, the other devil finally noticed Han Li's new location. It had no other thought but to attack. With a long shriek, all the bone spikes surrounding it circled in the air before shooting towards Han Li's new location. They traveled with speed that could overtake a dragon. In the blink of an eye, countless bone spikes arrived near Han Li. Han Li glanced at the attack without revealing the slightest fear. Silver light flashed in front of him. A small shield appeared where there was nothing and created a layer of dense silver light around him. The blood spikes then arrived before the silver light. Fist-sized explosions burst as each spike struck, creating the clatter of heavy rain. The barrier soon rippled and began to violently sway as if it were on the verge of collapse. The might of the bone spikes was far beyond imagination. Each one possessed the power of a top-grade magic treasure. The Tailstar Essence shield wasn't able to deflect the attacks. Han Li's expression changed from the sight of this and chanted an incantation. A thumb-sized golden ball appeared on his forehead, glowing with light as it created a layer of golden mist around him. This was the Vajra barrier Han Li nurtured within his body. Having refined the Vajra relic inside his body for countless years, its defensive power had far overtaken that of the Tailstar Essence shield. When the silver barrier eventually collapsed, the rest of the bone spikes fiercely struck, sounding metal clangs as they struck the Vajra barrier. Golden light directly flashed from its surface, blocking the barrage with ease. Meanwhile, a phoenix cry sounded from the three-colored flames in his hand. A flame bird with talisman characters suddenly flew out from it and unfolded its wings as it flew down. It was clear it was making its way to the immobilized horned devil. Although the devil couldn't move, a fierce expression appeared from its face. It opened its mouth and spat out a white wave to meet the flame bird. A rumbling, deafening explosion shook the air as the white wave and the bird collided. Although the sound wave was one of the devil's strange innate abilities, its body was trapped and it was unable to circulate its devilish chi, greatly weakening its power. The attack couldn't hope to compare with the Triflame fan. The confrontation only lasted for a brief moment, and the Firebird exploded. A three-colored halo suddenly appeared and spread out, engulfing the white wave underneath it. Afterward, the halo quickly grew, sweeping past the horned devil in an instant and turning it into nothing. While the scene may be described slowly, this took place in the mere span of several breaths. As for the Archsaint, his expression greatly changed when he saw this. How could he have expected that Han Li wouldn't die from his two devils, but rather, he would kill one of the two he released? At that moment, he realized he was dealing with no ordinary Grand Cultivator. A furious alarm taking over him, he didn't dare to delay and hastily commanded his spiritual sense. He spat out a black streak from his mouth, creating a cloud of black chi that soon vanished. As for the spiked devil, it let out a roar and its four eyes glinted before disappearing. The space behind Han Li stirred, and the devil stretched out its silver hands from nothing. Crack! The two arms grew several times in size and claws burst out from its hands. They fiercely swiped at Han Li's head and back. Meanwhile, black light flickered at that moment, where a black octagonal skull-sized hammer appeared 10 meters above Han Li's head. Carrying sinister black chi, it fiercely smashed down. From its dreadful devilish chi, one could tell it was a rarely seen devil artifact. The Archsaint didn't stop his attack there. With a tremble of his shoulders, the other four devil phantoms appeared again behind him. They all opened their eyes and blurred, charging at Han Li in black streaks. After killing one of the devils, Han Li faced a united front against the Archsaint and the other devils. Han Li let out a sigh. Before he took any further action, azure light flickered from his body and silver light lit up closely behind him. A silhouette suddenly appeared, taking the attack of the Silver Devil. Two world-shaking explosions shook the air. Within the silver flashing light, the azure silhouette remained completely still. Rather, the devil reaching out from behind was completely shaken from the impact and fell back. Meanwhile, light flickered from above Hanli. A small azure cauldron wrapped into the air and slowly spun in place. Then azure thread shot out from it as its lid opened, catching the black hammer that was smashing towards him and suspending it in midair. The jet-black octagonal hammer simply emitted a thread of sparkling blue flame in response to being caught by the cauldron. The chilliness the flame emitted was downright eerie. Although Han Li couldn't tell just how powerful the devil flames were, they were by no means ordinary. Blue flame wrapped around the heaven-void cauldron and rigidly trapped it in the air without the slightest show of effort. No matter how fiercely the cauldron flames burned, the blue thread was completely unaffected. Han Li ignored what was happening above him and turned his sights on the 4 black streaks that were shooting towards him. "The devil sages," Han Li muttered silently. A trace of a smile appeared on his face and he shook his sleeve. Suddenly, several rolls of thunder sounded out, followed by 4 dense bolts of lightning arcing out from his sleeve. In a flash, they accurately struck the 4 black streaks. Several explosions sounded out as 4 blinding golden flashes ruptured, drowning out the black streaks in an instant. The devil phantoms seemed to have met their weakness and quickly evaporated like morning dew. This had taken Han Li only a token effort. In the mere blink of an eye, the azure silhouette behind Han Li raised its hand and produced a small crimson bow in its hand, drawing it back. A deafening boom shook the air. Blinding red light and countless arrows of flame were released, filling the sky with its barrage. At that moment, the spike-covered devil saw a skyful of arrows shooting towards it and looked on with fear. It let out a large shout, and its body glowed with crimson light. When the spiked devil finished taking its defensive actions, the barrage struck its barriers. Countless arrows ruptured on impact, and the devil was submerged in flames. Explosions shook the air for a long while, in a display of their terrifying power. However, the devil within the flames remained unscathed inside its crimson barriers. It took a deep breath, and it waved their silver arms, intending on cutting away the crimson flames that surrounded it. Then the sounds of thunder struck. In the devil's fright, it discovered that a green arrow was shooting towards them in an arc of lightning. Although the devil didn't know the arrow was precisely, it blurred from sight in an attempt to dodge it. But what the devil failed to sense while they were distracted by the arrow was the black crystal knife that strangely appeared above them. As silently as it appeared, it dropped down and slid itself toward its head. The spiked devil hadn't noticed a thing. Suddenly, the azure silhouette halted their attack, and the endless barrage of flame arrows came to a halt. Baffled by this change and still evading the green arrows, a black streak silently circled one of the devil's necks like a bolt of lightning, and its triangular head toppled of its neck. The crimson light barrier may as well have been air. This came as no surprise. The knife was refined from a devil essence diamond, an extremely rare material condensed for countless years from pure devilish chi. How could a barrier quickly formed from devil chi hope to block it? With Han Li's second nascent soul residing in the human-like puppet, it didn't require any instruction. In the instant the dagger executed the devil, it rushed forward to the devil's corpse. It opened its mouth, and a cloud of black light rushed out from it, enveloping the corpse. Then it dragged out a phantom from the body that had a striking resemblance to the devil. The phantom was so dim that it looked like it could disperse at any moment. It was then dragged back into the puppet's mouth in the cloud, and absorbed by the second nascent soul residing inside of it. The pure devilish chi would prove to be significant to the cultivation of the Zenith Yin arts. With the phantom absorbed, the headless devil corpse dissolved into ash with a gentle wind. Then in a blur, the puppet returned to Han Li's side with its arms behind its back. From a distance, if it weren't for the difference of their clothes, it would appear as if there were 2 of Han Li standing side by side. At the moment, Han Li was fiddling with his trifling fan as he calmly looked across from him. Han Li indifferently said, "Fellow Taoist 6 Paths, I've already seen your 6 Apex Devils technique. If you don't have any else to impress me with, I will be sending you off." When Archsaint 6 Paths heard this, his face grew pale and disbelief was betrayed from his eyes. 2 of the late nascent soul stage demons he regarded as his trump cards were exterminated with ease. It was beyond belief. Furthermore, his opponent was able to make use of the flame fan, the small azure cauldron, and the green wooden ruler. Each of these treasures possessed an immense power. Let alone the famous Heaven Void Cauldron and Han Li's use of the incarnation techniques, he didn't have the slightest information on the other two grand treasures. But what was particularly bizarre was that his unfathomable incarnation alone was able to slay one of his devils. His heart dropped. How was this possible? Han Li should have only been at late nascent soul stage for about 100 years at most. For him to master these profound techniques and acquire these grand treasures in such a short amount of time. Although he had never seen a deity transformation stage cultivator, he had no doubt that Han Li's current abilities were close to one. When the old devil heard Han Li's words, his back trembled and his eyes narrowed. Then he opened his mouth and a scarf of black mist roiled out. The object quickly blurred and immediately covered him in black wind. The winds let out a shrieking whistle before letting out a tremble and kiting backwards, carrying the old devil with them. The black wind became vague and flew at immense speed. Several blurs later, it left a chain of afterimages. In an instant, the wind strangely appeared an even greater distance away. There even was a remnant of black wind in its original position. As a result, there were several balls of black wind present, all capable of teleporting away. In the blink of an eye, they could travel over 300 meters away. A normal late-nascent soul cultivator would feel helpless against such bizarre movements. Of course, Han Li wasn't an ordinary late-nascent soul cultivator by any means. When he saw this, he wore an odd expression. So you're actually running away. Your bonded magic treasure seems quite good at it. If it were before, I fear I may have had some trouble. But now, huh? Han Li took a deep sigh and the thunderstorm wings trembled behind his back, letting out a roll of thunder. Arcs of white and azure lightning appeared on the wing's surface. Soon after, they formed balls of lightning in the surrounding air, spinning in place. As he stretched out his wings, he floated in the air, drifting slightly to the side. At the moment, he was looking in the distance at the black blur that was Archsaint Six Paths. He snorted and fanned his wings once. Gales immediately erupted around him, and the suspended balls of lightning raged, striking together. Azure white lightning erupted in deafening booms, only for the gales to gather all of it into the two wings. Covered in a layer of lightning, the thunderstorm wings wildly flapped several times, followed by Han Li disappearing from his original location in a flash of azure white lightning. A breath later, lightning sparked 100 meters away, and it happened again after a pause, each time heading 100 meters further out. Its speed was quite faster than the old devil's black winds. In several blinks, the lightning pursued the black wind until it was only 30 meters away. As Han Li rode the lightning, he could clearly see the old devil's face of terror within the black wind. With another wave of his wings, another clap of thunder roared, and he arrived in front of the black wind in an azure-white flash. The lightning faded to reveal Han Li blocking the old devil's path. The black gales came to a brief stop, only to quickly change direction. At that moment, Han Li sneered and held his hands in an incantation gesture, and lightning clapped from within him. His stature burst several inches in size, grew thicker, with 4 arms jutting out from his flesh. Golden light lit up on his skin only for a moment before disappearing. In the blink of an eye, he turned into a large man of immense strength and stature. This was the transformation after making use of the 3rd layer of the bright jade arts. With this transformation done, he raised his hands, summoning purple flames in his hands, and he held them together to form a large purple saber of flame. Afterward, the wings on his back strangely trembled, and he shot forward. But his body strangely warped the moment he set off, and his wings trembled with inconceivable frequency, causing the nearby air to warp with its movements. He disappeared in a white line along the way. When the old devil saw this, he knew things were turning out for the worst. Seeing that he could no longer flee, he concentrated the magic power in his body and caused the black wind surrounding him to surge in size. At the same time, he flipped his hand, producing a crimson shield in front of him. Letter 1D68F, letter 1D563, letter 1D41E, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D430, letter 1D556, letter 1D41C, letter 1D698, letter 1D5FA. Just as he was about to activate it, a white line appeared above him and vanished as soon as it had appeared. Following that was the old devil's loud yell. The crimson shield now fell to the ground along with the part of his arm, the rest of his arm covered in purple ice. The stump of an arm was smooth and sleek, leaving not a drop of blood behind. The old devil then realized that a slender gap had been cut through his black winds. He looked in the direction of the attack in his severed arm. There was no warning. Frightened, he hastily pointed to the crimson shield in front of him with his remaining arm. The shield flew high and enveloped him in a screen of crimson flame. Simultaneously, he released his spiritual sense around him, flusteredly searching anywhere for any sight of Han Li. At that moment, the white line reappeared 30 meters behind the old devil. After circling once in the air, it paused and revealed a silhouette, Han Li. He saw Han Li examining his own body. The two wings on his back were gently fluttering, and a purple light blade was still being held in his hand. Although the 9 Gale transformations possess great power, it places a burden too great on the body, Han Li muttered to himself. Even with the 3rd layer of the bright Jade arts, I find it difficult to use it even once. That is only natural, Han Li heard a boy's voice with a careless tone. This technique was something that the bird-type demon cultivators founded. As a human, you won't be able to truly make use of this technique even with the aid of the thunderstorm wings. A far greater strain will be placed on your body than an ordinary demon bird cultivator after forcefully making use of this technique. As for the bright Jade arts, you're only able to use its 3rd layer a few times at most. Forcing any more would cause your body to quickly fall into a state of collapse. If you plan on making full use of this technique, you best cultivate the next layer of the bright Jade arts. So it was like that, Han Li sighed. Although I made use of it several times when I was cultivating it, I hadn't felt the strain of distant use since I was in such limited space. He waved his hand and scattered the purple blade he held. The child then chuckled and spoke no further. Following Han Li's appearance, the old devil immediately discovered trace of him. However, the soaring sky beast's child form was undetectable to him, nor could he hear his voice transmissions. All he heard was Han Li softly muttering to himself. Bewilderment flickering from his eyes, he quickly slapped a spirit beast pouch at his waist. Black light suddenly flashed, summoning a jet-black 2-headed python. Although it was only 10 meters long, its tri-horned head and the green chi leaking out from its mouth displayed its incredibly venomous nature. Then Archsaint Six Paths opened his mouth and spat out an item wrapped in black light. The item spun once in the air, and the light faded away to reveal a small white flag. Following an incantation from the old devil, it massively expanded to 3 meters tall. When Han Li saw the banner, he couldn't help but reveal his surprise. The pole of the banner was forged from human bones with black mist across its surface. Gray talisman characters faintly glowed from it, and there were 3 different skulls embedded in it, all of them wearing a sinister smile, showing their crooked, wicked, sharp fangs. Their laughs shook the blood of those who heard it. With a soft shout, the old devil pressed his hand against the bone banner. The 3 skulls trembled as black mist spouted out from their mouths. They fished up his severed hand, fighting each other as they devoured pieces of it. The skulls flashed with crimson light, their stature immediately enlarged. With this, most of the terror on Archsaint Six Paths' face vanished, and he sullenly turned to look at Han Li. It appeared the old devil had regained his senses. With the bizarre speed that Han Li displayed, he knew escape was no longer an option. He would be rushing to his death if he continued to flee. It would be better to struggle to the very end, hoping to find any chance of victory. As a result, he revealed the last treasure he held in reserve, something that had never been seen by others. Letter 1D65B, letter 1D493, letter 1D486, letter 1D65A, letter 1D498, letter 1D486, letter 1D484, letter 1D490, letter 1D4F6. Han Li frowned as the sight of this. Although he had never seen the treasure before, the banner carried astonishing yin qi. He didn't dare to underestimate it. Han Li then heard an odd sound. The 3 divine souls banner. I didn't expect someone in this world capable of refining such a wicked item. It is truly beyond belief. It is quite famous in the spirit realm as one of the 7 great wicked artifacts. Of course, this superficial copy possesses only a mere fraction of a true banner. The creation of it is exceptionally bloody, requiring each human or beast it is refined from to die a horrible death. Although it isn't particularly powerful, it required the deaths of many cultivators. The child chuckled. Although he spoke highly of the banner, there was a hint of fear in his voice. So it was like that. A brief moment of realization was followed with a sneer. It is no wonder he is the greatest devil cultivator in the scattered star seas. There is nothing he shies away from. Since he has a wicked artifact of such repute, I may as well test its power. Han Li then reached at his waist and raised his hand, summoning forth a jet-black bottle. The bottle spun in the air, and its lid opened of its own accord. Suddenly, gray yin qi shot out from within, releasing 5 white silhouettes leisurely floating in the air. They were the unbreakable Sink Devils. As soon as the 5 devils appeared, Han Li formed an incantation gesture. Suddenly, 5 skeletons climbed out from the ocean and instantly turned into wheel-sized ghost heads. With twisted horns and vicious fangs, they pounced directly at the banner. Unbreakable Sink Devils. As expected of his reputation as the greatest devil cultivator of the seas, Archsaint Six Paths immediately recognized the 5 devils and couldn't help but utter their name. As the old devil didn't know how Han Li acquired the Sink Devils rather than personally creating them, he believed Han Li to be a vicious devil cultivator like himself. He immediately felt his heart sink. This person was already difficult to deal with. If Han Li was also skilled in devil Dao techniques, he might have truly run into calamity. With the Sink Devils whistling towards him, he had no choice but to move the banner in front of him. The bone banner trembled. Its 3 embedded skulls let out chilling cackles before opening their mouths and spouting out pitch-black yin qi. As they continued their charge, the Sink Devils opened their mouths, spouting out green yin flames. For a time, black qi and green devil flames roiled together and ruptured continuously. In the following moment, the old devil's cheek switched. In the confrontation, the Sink Devil's yin fire pushed back the black qi with overwhelming force. Archsaint Six Paths let out a string of curses in his mind. The best of his knowledge, the Sink Devils should only have the abilities expected of the late core formation stage, but the ghost heads before his eyes displayed a power far beyond that. They suppressed the 3 early nascent soul stage devil skulls embedded in his banner. But it also stood to mention that a magic treasure's power heavily depended on the wielder's magic power and control. The old devil gritted his teeth and formed an incantation gesture with a single hand, opening his mouth to spit out a mist of blood essence. The bone banner loudly droned, absorbing all of it in an instant. Its talisman characters roiled with great intensity, and countless fist-sized skulls began to appear around it. These phantoms opened their mouths all at once, spitting out countless streams of black qi, massing together to take the form of a black flood dragon. The dragon circled in the air once before pouncing towards the 5 ghost heads. 2 of the Sink Devils faintly trembled, turning back from their ghost head forms to skeletons. They slapped their hands together and summoned a pair of meter-long bone sabers in their hands. Without any fear, they charged to meet the flood dragon in battle. With 2 less ghost heads, the yin fire released by the remaining 3 Sink Devils greatly weakened, stabilizing the confrontation with the bone banner's black qi. Black qi and yin flames were in deadlock. The old devil felt a moment of relief, but when he looked at Han Li again, his heart trembled. Han Li was looking at the battle with his hands behind his back, wearing a mysterious smile on his face. It was at that moment he suddenly sensed something amiss, and he returned his gaze to the battle. He betrayed bafflement on his face, and his heart dropped. Suddenly, a feeling of extreme danger appeared above his head. Suddenly, the strange 2-headed python spiraling above his head let out a noisy, bewildering cry, catching the old devil's attention. He turned his head and to find an azure silhouette floating 10 meters behind him. A black crystalline knife had cleaved through the black wind surrounding him and was slowly making its way to his crimson light barrier. Had he not turned around, he feared his body would soon lack a head. Archsaint Six Paths' face was drained of all blood. When the second nascent soul inside the puppet saw that his ambush was exposed, he suddenly cast an incantation gesture. With the sound of tearing space, the knife blinked forward. As for the puppet, silver light brightly glowed from its body before disappearing without a trace. Meanwhile, Han Li finally took action after standing from a distance with his hands behind his back. With a cold glint lighting up in his eye, he raised his hand, and green light flashed as the 8-spirit ruler strangely warped in front of him. He grabbed the ruler and waved it at Six Paths. Then, with a flutter of his wings and a clap of thunder, he vanished. Incapable of paying attention to what Han Li was doing, the old devil saw the jet-black knife stop for just a moment before easily piercing his defensive barrier. In that instant, he let out a deafening shout. His figure blurred, and suddenly, a black streak flew out from the bottom of his chest to meet the saber. Following that, his body turned into 2 copies of itself and shot off in different directions. As Archsaint Six Paths split into 2, the 2-headed serpent spat out a torrent of inky liquid beneath it, creating a toxic mist that enveloped everything 30 meters below it. Explosions relentlessly exploded. Black light and the knife struck and erupted in a ball of blinding black light. It was unknown what treasure Six Paths released, but it managed to block the Devil Essence diamond knife. Silver light flashed, and the puppet strangely appeared at the old devil's original position. The roiling toxic mist enveloped it completely. Following its appearance, the two-headed snake rocked its head and dived at the puppet. But in the next moment, a silver lotus appeared above the serpent's head without warning. It was a foot large and glowed brightly with seven-colored Buddhist light. The black serpent's movements immediately slowed as the Buddhist light trapped it and stopped it immediately. Only its two pairs of green eyes were moving. Immediately after, two silver threads swiftly cut through the green mist and wrapped around the serpent's two heads, only for them to topple off. Then as the green mist roiled, the human puppet slowly flew out without displaying the slightest damage. In truth, the serpent was actually an interesting animal. The toxic mist was on par with the 10 absolute poisons of the cultivation world. If common cultivators touched it, they would immediately perish. But this wasn't the most vicious part of the poison. Rather, it is able to penetrate most elemental barriers without any warning or sensation. Any nascent soul cultivator that didn't guard against this would meet their end. This was the reason the old devil labored over nurturing the spirit beast. Contrary to expectations, the puppet didn't possess any flesh, thus making the poison ineffective no matter how powerful and allowing the serpent to be killed with ease. One of Six Paths, Phantoms had a mental connection with the black serpent. Having immediately felt when the serpent died, he betrayed a trace of fear on his face. Without even turning around, he pointed to the bone banner and then fled with all his might. The banner trembled before black light brightly glowed, as if about to take to the sky. It was at that moment, an arc of azure lightning flashed above the phantom as Han Li came into view. With blue light flickering from his eyes, he looked down and waved his hand, creating a net of lightning underneath him. Then, he summoned a small azure cauldron with a flip of his other hand, releasing countless azure threads in a simultaneous barrage-off. Although the old devil had a miraculous doppelganger technique, displaying hardly any difference in their spiritual sense, Han Li's bright-sight spirit eyes were able to see right through them and instantly recognized minute differences, as well as which was true arch-saint. Both of the phantoms loudly yelled with trembling shoulders upon seeing Han Li launched an attack. The attack arrived right before one of the phantoms in an instant. At this moment, the phantom appeared much dimmer and vague than just a moment before. The true archsaint shook his sleeve and summoned a blue jade umbrella over his head. It quickly expanded several times its original size in an instant, protecting the old devil entirely from above. Several thuds sounded as the cauldron's azure threads struck Six Paths' phantom. The threads paused for only a second before piercing cleanly through. Shortly after, arcs of golden lightning burst struck, immediately wiping away the phantom without any resistance. Soon after, the lightning and threads fused together with dazzling flashes, and in a blur struck the top of the umbrella. Following a bright storm of light, the umbrella remained unscathed. The umbrella hadn't moved the slightest inch from the ata. When Han Li saw this, his expression sank and he reached his hand out, summoning a golden meter-long sword in his grasp. Soon after, the wings on his back stirred and dived down, disappearing in a white line. The old devil was quick to react and attempted to dodge, but before he could act, golden light flashed from the surface of the umbrella. Zap! The center of the umbrella was cleaved through the center. "Ah!" the old devil shouted. He immediately surrounded himself in black light as he fled. But just as he took off, the space in front of him warped where a white thread appeared, coiling around the old devil like lightning. His escape denied, the next thing he felt was a chill on his back. In a flash, a pail of purple flames broke through his barrier of devilish chi and pierced through him from behind. The treasure armor that wore close on his body wasn't able to block the attack in the slightest. Apart from sharp pain, the old man could only hear a faint sigh from behind him. Then, he looked down to find a palm of purple flames jutting out from him, soon quickly spreading a layer of purple flames all around him. In the blink of an eye, it covered most of his body and sealed him in ice. Despite having his face sealed in ice, he twisted it into a grimace and gritted his teeth. A muffled boom sounded. The bottom half of his body that had yet to be frozen suddenly exploded. As a cloud of blood and gore sprinkled the air, crimson light flashed. The blood ignited and charged towards Han Li. At that same moment, a ball of green light shot out from the corpse and flickered over 100 meters away. The green light wrapped around a pitch-black nascent soul. Its hands were holding tightly onto a green jade bottle. Han Li shook his sleeve, releasing a torrent of purple flames that promptly extinguished the devilish flames. However, he took no further actions to chase after the old devil. Han Li's calm demeanor only caused the old devil's nascent soul to flee in a panic. After flickering from view several times, the nascent soul appeared hundreds of meters away and turned around, stunned to see that Han Li remained completely still. He couldn't help but stop. At that moment, the air above the nascent soul flashed, followed by the silent appearance of a pitch-black knife. It was only when the knife arrived right above its head did the nascent soul discover it. By that time it was already too late. A black streak flashed and the nascent soul was cleaved into two. And with a bright flourish of silver, Han Li leisurely made his way over. When the human-like puppet disposed of the two-headed snake, Han Li had it remain in position nearby. Then with his command, it intercepted the nascent soul's escape. Following that, a strange scene followed. The nascent soul hadn't disappeared after it was cleaved into two. Rather, it turned into clouds of roiling black chi, separating into 6 lines that show off in different directions. The puppet was alarmed and immediately flicked its fingers. Suddenly, thunder clapped and a dozen fine arcs of lightning were quickly released, striking the black chi in a flash. Several muffled claps of thunder followed a chain of golden explosions. The black chi was evaporated. The devil cultivator known to shake the scattered star seas for hundreds of years met his end. The human puppet took a glance at the area of the explosions. After making certain there were no more remnants of the nascent soul, it promptly reached out summoned small bottle into its grasp. It didn't immediately open the bottle, but instead slowly floated towards Han Li. The old devil was truly out of luck. The secret technique to turn a nascent soul into a ghost was incredibly rare. Against an ordinary cultivator, one of the ghosts formed from the nascent soul may have been able to escape, allowing him the opportunity to return again. But as it so happened, Han Li experienced such a technique once before during his time in the Mulan Plains and was prepared for such a thing to happen. As such, the human-like puppet made use of the divine devil-bane lightning from the bamboo arrow to strike down all the ghost fragments. If there was even a single moment of hesitation, it would have been greatly troublesome. After a ghost fragment hit itself, it will be incredibly difficult to find. When the human-like puppet flew up to Han Li, it tossed the green bottle over to him. Han Li caught it and examined it for a moment before revealing excitement on his face. But before he opened the bottle, ghostly cries shrieked from the distance. Han Li raised his head and looked over to the unbreakable Sink Devils. Without the old devil controlling the bone banner, its power greatly decreased, allowing the Sink Devils to regain the advantage. However, the 3 skulls embedded on the banner belonged to no ordinary cultivators. Although they were no match for the Sink Devils, their desperate flaming rage appeared exceptionally brutal. When Han Li saw this, he frowned and ordered the Sink Devils with an incantation gesture. Suddenly, 3 of unbreakable Sink Devils flew off, returning to their original skeletal form. The 2 devils that were fighting with the Mist Flood Dragons also withdrew. Before the Flood Dragons and the 3 skulls from the banner could resume their attack, the Sink Devils all formed incantation gestures and opened their mouths. 5 differently colored icy flames rushed out and fused together, creating a torrent of rainbow flames. The Flood Dragon of Black Chi was the first to meet the flame, and the result was as expected. Under the rainbow flames, the Black Flood Dragon's movement slowed. In the blink of an eye, its movements gradually grew increasingly sluggish until it became nearly still. The Sink Devils then let out a long whistle. Countless palm-sized blades of rainbow ice leaped out from the flames, shredding the Black Flood Dragon until it was only black chi, only for it to be burned away by the flames. The 3 skulls were faring even worse than the Flood Dragon. When the black chi they spat contacted the rainbow flame, it slowed and was soon wiped away by the flame. When the skulls saw the flames slowly draw closer, a trace of fear appeared from their eyes, and their whimpers grew louder. The Sink Devils sinisterly cackled at this display, and soon the icy flames from their mouths halted, suddenly turning to 5 gray streaks into the sea of flame. In that next moment, when the rainbow flames nearly arrived at the top of the bone banner where the 3 skulls resided, 5 clouds of gray chi flew out from the flames and took the form of malevolent ghost heads. They bared their fangs with excitement and sped forward without any abilities. Crack, the 5 ghost heads fiercely bit down on the 3 skulls. Of course, the 3 skulls weren't about to accept their fate. They bit back at the Sink Devils. Suddenly, strange howls and violent screams sounded as the ghost heads and skulls tore at each other with their teeth. Due to the vast amount of black chi they earlier released, the three skulls were lacking in vitality. Their position was even worse since they were outnumbered. In the blink of an eye, the two of the three skulls were torn apart by four of the ghost heads and devoured in large mouthfuls. It took all the strength of the last ghost head to ward off the fifth ghost head for the time being. When Han Li saw this, he smiled with satisfaction. Meanwhile, the small cauldron he held in his hand let out a faint sigh. What? Does fellow Taoist Endless Sky have any suggestions for my rainbow glacial flames? Nonsense, but your rainbow glacial flames remind me of many 5 elemental type techniques from the spirit realm. After these techniques are fully used, they are divided into 5 colors like your glacial flames. However, your glacial flames are incredibly cold. If an opponent mistook your flames for an elemental technique, they would suffer quite a bit. The 5 elements refer to wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. Azure light flashed and an azure-robed young boy appeared on top of the heaven-void cauldron. He had red lips, white teeth, and a pair of plump white feet. He spoke leisurely as he glanced in the direction of the sink devils. An elemental technique, Han Li asked with a start. That's right, the boy smiled with a trace of mockery. Since I've arrived in your mortal realm, I've discovered that there are few cultivators that learn multiple elements. Most only learn one. He. If any of those people ascended to the spirit realm, I fear they will have no hope of ascending to the void refinement stage. What do you mean? Han Li quickly asked with a shaken heart. It's nothing much. It's still too early to speak with you about the void refinement stage. However, I will mention that a crucial point of ascending to the void refinement stage is to fuse the 5 elements into one. If you manage to raise yourself to the deity transformation stage, it would be best for you to primarily cultivate as many of the 5 elements as you can. Peculiar elements such as wind and lightning are too difficult to fuse together. This way, you'll have a greater chance of breaking through to void refinement. Of course, cultivation methods with multiple techniques are far more difficult to cultivate than ordinary techniques. The rate at which magic power gathers will be inferior to single-element techniques as well. If you don't have high hopes for reaching void refinement, it would be better to only cultivate a single element. With the increased rate at which you gain magic power, you'll be able to more easily survive the minor heavenly tribulations that occur every 300 years. Han Li was left stunned by these words. After a long while, he eventually brought himself to say, 5 elements into one. That is quite troublesome. My Azure Essence Sword art is only a wood-tributed technique. As for the wind and lightning-attributed techniques, that is understandable. After all, they are variant elements that are formed by combining others. But shouldn't I cultivate techniques that conform to my body's spiritual roots? Could it be that heavenly spiritual roots are ordinary in the spirit realm? And what is this minor heavenly tribulation that you mention? Do humans in the spirit realm experience similar tribulation to metamorphosed demon beasts? The boy flashed a mysterious smile and chuckled. I didn't expect that a few of my words would attract so many questions. In that case, I'll give you a bit of an explanation. Heavenly spiritual roots are also remarkably rare in our spirit realm. Powers and sects of all sizes do their utmost to attract these disciples. After all, those with single elemental spiritual roots would have difficulty entering void refinement stage. Heavenly spirit roots are far more difficult to cultivate, but the void refinement cultivators they produce are hegemons and sect leaders. And those with heavenly spirit roots break through to void refinement. A majority of them will be cultivating techniques with 2 or more attributes. As for the problem with spiritual roots, that is easily solved. The humans in the spirit realm devised a method to use particular demon beast cores to substitute their lack of spiritual roots. This core spiritual root method is somewhat inferior to genuine spiritual roots. There should be no problem in cultivating techniques of other elements. Of course, the core spiritual root method can only be used with pre-existing spiritual roots. Mortals cannot use them. In fact, there was a method in the past that used magic tools and treasures as a substitution for spiritual roots. However, this method is incredibly dangerous and slow, so this method is hardly being used. There are cultivators with anywhere from 3 or 4 elemental spirit roots that do manage to break through to void refinement stage, but they all possess incredible perseverance. They can't be compared to ordinary cultivators, haha. The so-called minor heavenly tribulation is something that all cultivators above core formation stage much experience. The boy briefly paused before continuing. In the lower realm, Nascent soul and deity transformation cultivators experience a tribulation every 300 years, thus earning the name minor heavenly tribulation. At the middle realm, void refinement, integration, and grand ascension level cultivators experience a grand tribulation every 3 years. As for cultivators in the very last stage that ascended to the true immortal realm, they experience immortal tribulation. Normally, if your cultivation no longer progresses, the following tribulation will be far more powerful than the last. Also, the increased abundance of spiritual chi in the spirit realm leads to greater speeds in cultivation. But once one condenses a nascent soul, it is a race against time. Many famous cultivators die each year from tribulation. Fellow Taoist hands should think that you will have no problems past void refinement stage. Although these cultivator techniques technically have a limitless lifespan provided enough worldly essence, their lives aren't so peaceful or long. So long as you ascend to the spirit realm, death by heavenly tribulation is only a matter of time. With that said, the boy's face grew sullen and his eyes possessed deep fear. Han Li wore a grave expression. The boy didn't speak much, but his words clearly illustrated that the spirit realm was no paradise. But when Han Li heard that void refinement stage cultivators didn't have a lifespan, Han Li was overjoyed. Although he already read through a few records mentioning the limitless lifespan of a void refinement cultivator, he now possessed the full and certain truth. From his tone, it appeared that a limitless lifespan can only be achieved after he ascended to the spirit realm. Even if he managed to achieve void refinement in the mortal realm, the worldly essence is lacking, this limiting his lifespan. At the deity transformation stage, one is able to join with worldly essence. Their span won't be limited by 2,000 years once they enter the spirit realm. It was no wonder why these deity transformation eccentrics were so desperate to find a method to ascend. As for the tribulations that he mentioned, Han Li was somewhat cautious of them, but he didn't take them too much to heart. The matter was a bit too far away from him for his consideration. After Han Li asked a few more questions related to core spiritual roots and artifact spiritual roots, he eventually grew silent, his eyes twinkling in deep thought. A short moment later, Han Li fiddled with the dark green bottle in his hand and flicked off its cap. Azure light flashed, and the bottle rumbled before the cap shot off. In the next moment, he found that there was absolutely nothing inside of it. In his surprise, as he thought about what action to take next, a green light abruptly streaked out from the bottle and flew off. Although Han Li was caught unprepared, he wasn't about to allow it to escape. With a cold snort, he reached his hand out. A large azure hand appeared above the green light and slipped down to grab it. The escaping green light seemed to have already been weakened. Although it was fleeing with the utmost speed, the large hand easily grabbed it from the air. Within the flickering green light, one could see the vague appearance of a female nascent soul. Han Li couldn't help but stroke his chin at the sight. He stared at the nascent soul and slowly asked, "Who is your esteemed self? Why has 6 paths trapped you inside the bottle? Who are you? Where is that devil's 6 paths?" Although the nascent soul was trapped, it replied boldly. Facing a mere nascent soul, Han Li simply smiled and lazily replied, "If you're thinking about seeing him, I fear you will be disappointed. I already sent him to the underworld." "What, you killed that old devil? How is that possible? You're—" The nascent soul trembled and spoke with a tone of disbelief. "You know me," Han Li said with a tone of bafflement. Although he knew many female cultivators, he didn't know any at nascent soul stage apart from Ling Yuling. After a long pause, the nascent soul eventually spoke with an odd tone. "You're Han Li. When Heaven Void Hall opened, I saw you once before. It was later said that you acquired the Heaven Void Cauldron. I didn't expect that you could have escaped the pursuit from those old eccentrics and reach cultivation of this level." When he heard her mention Heaven Void Hall, he recalled where he heard her voice before. A flash of realization sparked in his mind and he doubtfully asked, "You're Lady Wen. I didn't expect that you'd remember me." She let out a long sigh. When she confirmed her identity, Han Li wore an astonished expression. This female nascent soul belonged to a woman named Lady Wen, who he originally saw at Heaven Void Hall. Although her cultivation at the time was significant to begin with, she must have acquired quite a few medicines in Heaven Void Hall and made much progress. He also remembered what relationship she had with 6 paths. "If I remember correctly, you should have been his Tao companion." Lady Wen resentfully snorted and hesitantly asked, "His Tao companion? Have you ever seen someone seal their Tao companion's nascent soul in a magic treasure? But more importantly, you truly killed that wretch 6 paths." Han Li smiled and wordlessly extended his finger. After a brief pause, Lady Wen's eyes followed where he pointed. Not far away, there was a block of purple ice that sealed a ruined corpse. It originally belonged to Archsaint Six Paths. Then the azure hand holding down Lady Wen wildly flickered before disappearing without a trace. Lady Wen's nascent soul was now freed. With her freedom restored, Lady Wen quickly shot forward and flew several circles around the corpse before letting out a frigid laugh to the sky. It really is that old wretch. As scheming as you are, I didn't expect that you would die first. Han Li frowned. Although he didn't know what happened for Six Paths and Lady Wen to fall out, he had no interest in hearing about it. Soon after, he began to consider what he should do next. The nascent soul's laughter eventually came to a stop, and she looked over to find Han Li wearing a pensive expression. There is no need for fellow Taoist Han to trouble himself. I've been kept inside that magic treasure for such a long period of time that I've weakened to the point where I can no longer possess a body. My nascent soul will have to immediately dissipate for a chance of reincarnation. I'm truly grateful that fellow Taoist Han managed to eliminate my enemy, but with my current abilities, I have no way to compensate you. I can only hope to repay you in my next life. With that said, she abruptly slapped the top of her head. A blinding red light shined and covered the nascent soul entirely. Gradually, the nascent soul scattered inch by inch before HL until it was no more. Han Li was shocked. He didn't think that Lady Wen would be so decisive that she would end herself without speaking another word to him. Was what happened so disastrous that she would keep this secret to the grave? But even if she didn't want to tell him what happened, he could fancy a guess. Although he was somewhat gloomy over what happened, it was better things ended this way. It would have been troublesome to figure out what to do with her. Han Li shook his head and sighed. He raised his hand and summoned the green bottle back into his grasp before placing it into his storage pouch. Then he released an arc of golden lightning from his hand and pulverized the purple ice and the rest of Six Paths' corpse, turning it into nothing more than shining specks. As for his storage pouch, Han Li simply took it into his possession. He quickly swept over its contents and found that most of them didn't catch his attention at his current level, despite many treasures being amongst them. But there were a few slips detailing Devil Dao techniques that piqued his interest. It is a pity that he didn't have the time to look at them. With all that done, Han Li beckoned to his puppet and directly head over to the bone banner. The puppet blurred and strangely disappeared. When he arrived at the bone banner, the 5 ghost heads cleanly devoured the skulls and had nearly devoured the entirety of the banner itself. When Han Li arrived in front of it, he shook his head. Although the bone banner was somewhat famous, it possessed too much fiendish qi and wasn't suitable for him. As such, he made no attempt to stop them. A short moment later, the Sink Devils finally finished destroying the banner, and they let out odd screams as if in an expression of joy. The devil qi they emitted seemed to be more concentrated than before. When Han Li saw this, his expression remained unchanged. He waited until their laughs finished before commanding them with a single hand. Although the Sink Devils were somewhat unwilling, they didn't dare to disobey and obediently arrived at Han Li's side, having experienced the pain from Han Li's restrictions several times before. Rather than withdrawing them, he calmly flew back in the direction of Heavenly Star City and had the Sink Devils closely follow after him. The battle between him and the old devil didn't last very long. Victory was achieved in only the time it took to finish a meal. If the city fell in that amount of time, Han Li would simply turn around and leave without care for anything else. It would simply illustrate that the city wasn't worthy of his help. Fortunately, this matter didn't come to pass. By the time Han Li led the Sink Devils back to the Heavenly Windfare Formations Core, the vast battle between the Star Palace and the Star-defying Alliance was still being fought with great intensity. Truthfully, it appeared the Star-defying Alliance had somewhat of an upper hand. This was because the twin land devils were truly formidable. As the blue devilish qi and the pink fragrant mist spread forward, it pushed back the Star Palace cultivators. The 2 original elders of the Star-defying Alliance were clearly superior to Old Man Zhao and the large purple-robed man. They could barely hold them back, let alone deal with the land devils. The lower-grade cultivators, on the other hand, would be immediately shredded to mist upon contact with the blue qi, or fall as if drunk upon touching the pink mist. As a result, the land devils wreaked havoc unchecked. In such turbulent fighting, Han Li's silent return hadn't caught anybody's attention. Han Li first swept his gaze at the huge windfire pillar and then glanced at the eye-catching display of the twin land devils. He sneered and wore a fierce expression on his face. He wordlessly pointed at the land devils. The sink devils at his side let out a series of low roars and soon charged towards them in 5 gray streaks. Then Hanli slapped a spirit beast pouch at his waist and produced a ball of golden insects above him. Hanli raised his hand and let out a soft yell. The insect swarm loudly buzzed and with a bang, turned into a dozen smaller clouds before dispersing. After Hanli was done with that, he waved the wings on his back and disappeared in a gust of wind. Although the nascent soul cultivators of the star-defying alliance were fighting away from the formation core, there were still several core formation stage cultivators standing on guard above it. This was to prevent the Star Palace from destroying the formation core in a surprise attack. The guards whispered to each other on top of the pillar, and they couldn't help but reveal their delight upon seeing that the star-defying alliance held the slight advantage in the battle. One of them turned around to speak to another cultivator, but then they saw something that made his complexion bloodlessly pale. When the other guards saw this, they turned around in fright and immediately let out frightened shouts. 30 meters in the air behind them, there was a youth silently floating there. He had his arms crossed and he wore a mysterious smile. This youth was the same grand cultivator that left the battle with their alliance leader. How could he be here? These core formation cultivators suddenly felt an icy chill down their backs. Before these cultivators could even think of running or calling out for help, Hanli's expression suddenly sank, and he flicked his hand several times from within his sleeve. Suddenly, golden sword streaks shot towards them. The many core formation cultivators trembled in fright, each moving to flee away. But several flashes later, the sword streaks flew past them and the guards fell down, all of their bodies riddled with holes. There were a few that managed to summon their magic treasures, but they promptly exploded, and their owners fell without resistance. The sword Chi Hanli produced from the bamboo cloudswarm swords were incredibly sharp, rivaling the power of even a top-grade magic treasure. Even nascent soul cultivators wouldn't dare to casually receive them, let alone trifling core formation cultivators. In a single breath, the core formation cultivators were extinguished. He retained a calm expression and indifferently looked at the giant pillar before him. Then, with a wave of his sleeve, a clear sound rang. Several small golden swords flew out from his sleeve like a school of fish and swelled to the size of a meter before fusing together. In flourishing golden radiance, a 10-meter-long golden sword appeared above the pillar. Magic power surged throughout Hanli's entire body in a frenzy as he let loose a low cry. Brilliant spiritual light erupted from the surface of the huge sword, and it shuddered before instantly transforming into a worm-like streak of golden light, circling in the air above before crashing down with ferocious might. A loud rumbling boom erupted as the golden light struck the massive bronze pillar. In the face of the golden light, the mountainous pillar appeared as if it had been constructed from Play-Doh, and it was sliced in half with ease. From a distance, it appeared as if a doomsday-like scenario was unfolding on the horizon. All of the Starfall Coalition cultivators nearby hurriedly rose into the air atop their treasures. Such a loud commotion had naturally drawn the attention of all of the cultivators on both sides. Thus, Hanli was naturally thrust under the limelight. At the sight of Hanli, completely contrasting expression appeared on everyone's faces. Some were horrified, while others were ecstatic. Of course, not everyone had the spare capacity to turn their attention toward Hanli. For example, Hanli was currently looking at a man and a woman who were caught in an extremely fierce battle with 5 massive ghostly heads, and were unable to pay any heed to the earth-shattering boom that had just erupted. Coincidentally, the devilish chi and pink fragrant mist emitted by the twin land devils were being completely dominated by the grayish-white devilish flames erupting from mouths of the 5 ghostly heads, so they had been forced firmly onto the back foot. Elder Zhao and Elder Ma were ecstatic upon seeing this, and they immediately cast their treasures toward the twin land devils to plunge them into an even more perilous situation. As for the dozen or so swarms of golden beetles released by Hanli, they were also dominating the battlefield. At Hanli's behest, the beetles only targeted Starfall Coalition cultivators below the nascent soul stage. They swept through the battlefield like golden clouds, and no matter what treasures were used to try and keep the beetles at bay, all of them were devoured into nothingness. Within a span of a few moments, several tens of cultivators had been completely devoured by the gold-devouring beetles. All of the Starfall Coalition cultivators nearby had been thrown into a complete panic, and all of them were desperately trying to get away from the swarms of beetles. The fact that Han Li had just destroyed the core of the heavenly Windfire formation with a single sword strike further compounded their woes, and morale had dropped to an all-time low. Many of the Starfall Coalition cultivators were already fleeing from the battle. There were only a few at first, followed by a dozen or so, which quickly turned into hundreds of cultivators fleeing into the distance. Han Li didn't even need to attack any further, and the Starfall Coalition's defeat had already been sealed. The old woman and the elderly man with the long surname could see that the situation was in a drastic downward spiral, so they also immediately shook off their opponents and flew away as quickly as they could. The twin land devils clearly also knew that it would be unwise to stay any longer, and they suddenly summoned several powerful treasures before detonating them all once. In doing so, the 5 ghostly heads were temporarily forced back, thereby creating an avenue of escape for the 2 of them. Han Li's brows furrowed upon seeing this, and he immediately flapped his thunderstorm wings without any hesitation, disappearing in the blink of an eye. The twin land devils had only just escaped from the ghostly heads when a dull thunderclap erupted up ahead. Following, Han Li appeared out of thin air, directly cutting them off. The 2 devils' hearts immediately sank upon seeing Han Li's cold and expressionless. However, both of them were powerful Devil Dao cultivators in their own right, so they certainly weren't going to give up and allow themselves be killed. As such, they glanced at one another before raising their hands in unison, summoning several treasures of various different colors. At the same time, their bodies swayed, and both of them unleashed devilish techniques to attack Han Li. A hint of killing intent surfaced in Han Li's eyes upon seeing this. Several days later, the entire scattered star seas was in a massive uproar. Not only did the final battle between the Star Palace and the Starfall Coalition commence far earlier than everyone had expected, the end result also had most people's jaws dropping to the ground. Not only had Wan Tianming of the myriad gates of enlightenment perished during this battle, many high-grade Starfall Coalition cultivators had also been killed, as had the vast renowned twin land devils. As such, Han Li's name became known to virtually everyone in the scattered star seas. Some people had even dug up some information about Han Li's past, particularly about how he had obtained the Heaven Void Cauldron from the Heaven Void Hall even prior to reaching the nascent soul stage, and how he had been hunted by the Starfall Coalition in the aftermath of that incident. Countless cultivators in the scattered star seas were amazed by those legendary tales, and there were no longer any nascent soul cultivators who dared to go after the Heaven Void Cauldron. In the next few months, the Star Palace deployed a large number of cultivators to recover their lost territory while also hunting down the high-grade Starfall Coalition cultivators who had managed to escape. In the end, they reached the main base of the Starfall Coalition in one fell swoop. The nascent soul elders of the Starfall Coalition were unwilling to concede, and they gathered a group of powerful cultivators to engage the Star Palace in another battle at the Starfall Coalition's main base. On this occasion, the Starfall Coalition naturally crashed to an even heavier defeat without a late nascent soul cultivator among their ranks. They had deployed 3 mid-nascent soul cultivators at once to take care of Han Li, only for 2 of them to be slain by Han Li with ease. The final cultivator was able to escape with his nascent soul intact using some kind of secret technique, but his body had been sliced in half, and even if he could successfully possess a new vessel, he would most likely be unable to recover to his original cultivation base. Letter 1D627, letter 1D4C7, letter 212F, letter 1D452, letter 1D4CC, letter 1D452, letter 1D4B8, letter 2134, letter 1D4C2. Thus, in the short span of just half a year, the Star Palace had become the ruler of the scattered star seas again, and all of the other sects and powers pledged their allegiance to the Star Palace once again. Ling Yuling took this opportunity to extend an olive branch the low-grade Starfall Coalition cultivators who had managed to escape, but she showed no mercy to the very few nascent soul stage Starfall Coalition elders that remained. As such, the Starfall Coalition began to crumble from the inside as all of the low-grade cultivators switched their allegiance to the Star Palace, while the remaining high-grade cultivators fled for their lives. In what seemed like the blink of an eye, the mighty Starfall Coalition had been wiped off the face of the scattered star seas. Half a year later, there was a man and a woman making their way through a long passageway within the belly of Heavenly Star City's sacred mountain. This passageway had been completely paved with pristine white jade, creating spotless mirror-like surfaces. The woman was an exquisite beauty while the man's appearance was much more mundane. They were none other than Han Li and the master of the Star Palace, Ling Yuling. Han Li was walking behind Ling Yuling, and he inspected the jade walls around him as he asked, "I can't believe the divine essence-effused mountain was placed in such a location. Is it really that fearsome?" Fearsome is an understatement, Brother Han. Any cultivators below the nascent soul stage who accidentally approach this mountain would immediately suffer from spiritual power backlash, and they could easily perish as a result. Nascent soul cultivators can stay around the divine essence-effused light a little longer, but prolonged exposure to the mountain could still result in a regression in cultivation base, Ling Yuling explained with a smile. "I'm even more curious about this divine essence-effused mountain now. I wonder how this mountain was discovered in the first place," Han Li mused with a contemplative look in his eyes. "Father did actually mention this to me in the past. During one of his journeys to the outer seas, he witnessed this mountain erupting out from an underwater volcano. In order to transfer the mountain to this place, Father had to expend extensive efforts, and there were even several core formation cultivators whose cultivation bases had severely regressed during the process. After that, my parents attained initial mastery of the divine essence-effused light before attempting to refine this mountain bit by bit as if it were treasure. However, this is an extremely time-consuming task, and even when they passed away, they had only refined a small portion of the mountain," Ling Yuling explained. If they had successfully refined this mountain, they most likely wouldn't have been bound to it as they were," Han Li chuckled. Ling Yuling merely smiled in response, yet gave no reply to this. After rounding a corner, her footsteps came to a halt. There was a massive green jade door up ahead further down the corridor, and there were countless shimmering restriction talismans of different colors plastered over the door. "This is where my parents once cultivated. These are the restrictions that they painstakingly set up in order to isolate the divine essence-effused mountain's 5 elemental power." As she spoke, Ling Yuling raised a hand, and a snowy white jade badge surfaced over her palm. She then waved the badge gently toward the gate, upon which a clump of white threads shot forth from the jade badge, sweeping away all of the restriction talismans on the jade door. The jade door abruptly began to tremor violently, following which a low buzzing sound rang out, and the entire door began to move. A serious expression appeared on Ling Yuling's face as she opened her mouth to blast forth a blue jade hook. The hook seemed to possess some kind of mystical property, and it transformed into a veil of blue light that settled over Ling Yuling's body. Only then did she turn to Han Li as she cautioned, "Treasures that don't contain any powers of the 5 elements are affected the least by the divine essence-effused mountain. You're obviously a lot more powerful than I am, but it's still best to exercise caution in there." "Don't worry, fellow Taoist Yuling, I know my limits," Han Li replied with a smile. Golden light abruptly shimmered all over his body, following which a shiny golden light barrier suddenly appeared. It was none other than the Vajra barrier that Han Li had cultivated. Even though this wasn't an item constructed from jade, it was something that was outside of the realm of the 5 elements. Ling Yuling faltered initially upon seeing this before a smile appeared on her face. She raised a hand to toss the jade badge into the air, then chanted something in a heavenly voice. The jade badge shuddered as runes of all types of different colors flew out from it before disappearing into the jade door. The ringing emanating from the jade door also came to an abrupt halt, following it opened outward, revealing a cavernous space and a vast expanse of white light. As soon as the jade door was opened, Han Li was struck by a bone-chilling sensation as the hairs on the back of his neck stood up on end. His heart jolted with shock as pure wood attribute spiritual power surged through his meridians like frantically galloping wild horses. Thankfully, he was somewhat mentally prepared for this and activated his Azure Essence sword art. Only then was he able to shrug off this asphyxiating spiritual pressure, and spiritual power within his body began to circulate in a normal manner again. Han Li's expression remained unchanged, but he was slightly shaken internally. He had been struck by such a fearsome sensation after activating his Vajra barrier. If he had refrained from doing so, he would have been in a bit of trouble just then. Han Li was not surprised that mere exposure to this mountain could threaten a normal cultivator's life. With that in mind, Han Li couldn't help but turn his gaze toward Ling Yuling. Even though she had that blue light barrier shielding her body, her blood had also churned violently in her veins just then, and her delicate cheeks had become faintly flushed, making her appear extremely alluring and seductive. After her face returned to its normal pallor, Ling Yuling made her way into the space beyond the jade door. Han Li naturally followed her inside. Beyond the Jade door was an astonishingly spacious cave close to 10,000 feet wide and over 1,000 feet tall. The walls of the cave were all paved with unidentifiable azure rocks, and there were some moonlight stones embedded into those walls, illuminating the cave in a faint white light. However, none of this was able to attract Han Li's attention in the slightest. His eyes had been completely drawn to the small mountain at the center of the cave. It would actually be inaccurate to call it a small mountain. In reality, it was only a gargantuan rock. The rock was around 500 to 600 feet tall, with a wide base that tapered as it up toward the peak. From a distance, it would indeed appear as if this were a miniature mountain. The surface of the mountain was completely black and very mundane looking. It was quite a jarring notion that this massive nondescript rock was the legendary divine essence-effused mountain. This is the divine essence-effused mountain. Han Li's footsteps faltered as he looked at the mountain before him through narrowed eyes. That's right, it was once grayish-white in color, but after my parents refined a small portion of it, it turned into this pitch-black color. Ling Yuling had stopped a few steps in front of Han Li, seemingly unwilling to advance any further. Han Li stood on the spot and carefully examined the mountain for a long while before striding past Ling Yuling as he slowly approached the mountain. As he drew closer and closer, Han Li could sense that the five-elemental power emanating from the mountain was growing noticeably more powerful. The spiritual power within his body was once again being whipped up into a frenzy. However, Han Li was already prepared this time, so the effects of the five-elemental power were quelled after activating his Azure Essence Sword Art again. Before long, he had already reached the small black mountain. Han Li had his hands clasped behind his back as he walked around the mountain. There was blue light shimmering incessantly within his eyes, as if he were trying to completely see through the entire mountain. However, his ever-liable bright-side spirit eyes disappointed him on this occasion. Even after injecting all of his magic power into his eyes, his vision was still unable to seep into the mountain in the slightest, let alone glean its internal structure. As for attempting to assess the mountain with his spiritual sense, that proved to be even more futile. Before his spiritual sense had even managed to approach the mountain, it was forcibly warped and kept out by the five-elemental power. Han Li stood with a contemplative look on his face, before suddenly stepping forward a few steps and stroking the mountain with his hand. He discovered that the mountain was as smooth and cool as jade, a texture that completely belied its appearance. A hint of surprise appeared on Han Li's face. "You seem a little bemused, Brother Han. You're not suspecting this mountain to be fake, are you?" Ling Yuling asked with a smile. Regardless of whether it's real or not, this thing can certainly disrupt the spiritual power of the nascent soul cultivator. Even if it's not the so-called divine essence-effused mountain, it's most likely a treasure of the same caliber. What's the point in forging something like this? Han Li chuckled. I'm glad you think that, Brother Han. If you really do plan on cultivating the divine essence-effused light, then you'll have to think about what you want to do with this mountain. If you want to take this mountain with you, even with your extraordinary powers, you most likely won't be able to travel far with it. Back when my father had first discovered this mountain, he had to cultivate the first few layers of the divine essence-effused light first. Even then, he was only able to transfer it from the outer seas to the Star Palace with the assistance of many palace disciples, and the process took him over 10 years. I suggest you cultivate for a few years in our Star Palace first, so you can at least master the first 2 layers of the divine essence-effused light. Then consider moving this mountain, Ling Yuling suggested. It sounds like what you're saying is that I won't be able to take this mountain unless I cultivate the divine essence-effused light first. Is it really that troublesome to transport? Han Li asked with a slightly skeptical expression. I'm not saying anything of that nature. You are definitely no less powerful than my father was at his prime, so perhaps you have some other type of secret technique that will allow you to take the mountain with you. Otherwise, you really will have to devise a course of action before you act, fellow Taoist Han, Ling Yuling replied with a smile. Han Li considered the situation for a moment before murmuring to himself, I'll give it a try first. After making up his mind, he made a hand seal before casting an azure incantation seal toward the pitch-black miniature mountain before him. Azure light flashed and the incantation seal shot forth through the air. However, when it was still around a foot away from the mountain, the incantation seal was suddenly warped and exploded before dissipating into specks of azure light. Han Li's brows furrowed as he quickly made several more hand seals, casting incantation seals of different colors one after the other. However, no matter what kind of incantation seal he tried, his efforts remained completely futile. All of them merely self-detonated before they could reach the divine essence-effused mountain. A grim expression appeared on Han Li's face as he pressed his palm against the surface of the mountain. On this occasion, he didn't immediately withdraw his hand. Instead, he began to chant something, and spiritual light shimmered on his hand as he attempted to forcibly cast an incantation seal directly into the mountain. However, as soon as the incantation seal left his hand, Han Li sensed an immense invisible power surging toward his hand. The spiritual power within his body that he had just managed to settle instantly escaped from his body, surging violently into the mountain. Han Li's expression changed drastically as he let loose a low cry. Scintillating golden light immediately radiated from his Vajra barrier, following which he abruptly rammed his spare hand into the mountain. His body shuddered as he stumbled back, cutting off the mountain's enormous suction power. Only then did Han Li heave a sigh of relief as his expression eased slightly. If a normal early nascent soul or mid-nascent soul cultivator had been in his shoes, their cultivation base would most likely have been damaged by that ordeal alone. Ling Yuling's heart also jolted with shock upon seeing this, and she hurriedly asked, "Brother Han, are you all right?" Han Li nodded as he replied, "I'm fine. This mountain is indeed rather peculiar. It appears that I won't be able to take it with me through normal means. I want to stay here for a while and see if I can think of another way to take this mountain with me. If it still can't be done, then I'll devise an alternative course of action when that time comes. Is that all right?" "Of course. However, even though you're quite powerful, I'd advise you not to stay here for too long at a time before you cultivate the divine essence-effused light. By my estimations, you should only stay here for a maximum of 3 to 4 consecutive days. Any longer than that, and your cultivation base could be hampered. I'll come back to check on you in 3 days, Ling Yuling cautioned. Han Li nodded in response, and Ling Yuling handed over her Jade badge to him before departing after a respectful curtsy. After Ling Yuling had left the cave, Han Li immediately waved the Jade badge in his hand toward the Jade cave. As he injected his power into the badge, countless talismans flew forth from within, plastering themselves onto the Jade door again. Following a burst of low ringing, the door closed itself once again. After doing all that, Han Li didn't immediately begin to examine the divine essence-effused mountain. Instead, he released his spiritual sense to carefully assess the cave around him. After verifying that there weren't any restrictions within the cave, he pulled out a stack of formation flags from his storage pouch in an unhurried manner before tossing them toward various corners of the cave. A dozen or so streaks of light immediately flew through the air before disappearing into the ground. Bursts of yellow mist began to billow out from the ground, concealing the entire interior of the cave in the blink of an eye. Han Li was feeling quite reassured after that, and he focused his attention on the small mountain again. He had seen a mountainous treasure like this once in the past in the form of a powerful ancient treasure by the name of the Thousandfold Mountain. However, the Thousandfold Mountain merely resembled a mountain, but in essence, it was still identical to a normal treasure. As such, it was nowhere near as troublesome as this mountain to tackle. In comparison, the divine essence-effused mountain was like a hedgehog, and no matter how he approached it, its figurative spikes seemed to be unavoidable. A ball of azure light suddenly flew out from within his sleeve before taking on the form of a small child. "He, that little girl seems to be very keen for you to cultivate the divine essence-effused light." It was none other than a projection of the endless sky beast in its human form. "I also get the feeling that this palace master Ling really wants me to cultivate the divine essence-effused light. If I recall correctly, the divine essence-effused light seems to be very difficult to cultivate, and even though it's been circulating throughout the scattered star seas for a long time, only the heavenly star sages have managed to achieve much success with it. If I want to cultivate the divine essence-effused light, I'll most likely have to borrow the power of this mountain. However, in that case, I'll most likely be bound to this mountain, just like the heavenly star sages were," Han Li analyzed in a calm manner. "Oh, so you're saying that little girl is trying to plot against you?" the small child asked. "I wouldn't put it in such severe terms. However, according to her plan, I'll most likely be trapped in Heavenly Star City forever and be forced to join the Star Palace. Otherwise, do you really think the Heavenly Star Sages would be kind-hearted enough to give me those secret techniques in exchange for my assisting their daughter on 3 separate occasions? On top of that, even though they gave me many secret techniques that could help me progress to the deity transformation stage, It doesn't take much analysis to figure out that only the divine essence-effused light is a truly viable option. They're clearly setting up a trap for me here. Han Li chuckled coldly as he looked at the divine essence-effused mountain. Aren't these two afraid that you'd see through their ploy? The small child pursed his lips. As long as I'm intent on progressing to the deity transformation stage, I'll most likely have to take this route, even though I know it's a trap. Hence, the heavenly star sages aren't afraid that I'll see through their tricks, as I'll have no choice in the matter anyway. However, if I can somehow find a way to take this mountain away with me before I cultivate the divine essence-effused light, then I won't have any concerns. It appears that the heavenly star sages are quite confident in this divine essence-effused mountain. But then again, it's no wonder that they're confident. They were trapped here by this mountain for several centuries, so they've most likely tried everything they could. I probably won't be able to do anything about this either, Han Li sighed as he stroked his chin. Then why don't you emulate the heavenly star sages and borrow the power of this mountain to cultivate the divine essence-effused light? After you reach a certain level of mastery, you'll be able to take this mountain back to the heavenly south region, won't you? The small child suggested with a smile. Do I look like I have a lot of time on my hands? Even if I master the first 2 layers of the divine essence-effused light in a short time and gain the ability to move this mountain, I won't be able to put it in my storage pouch, and nor will I be able to teleport with it. Do you expect me to carry this mountain back to the heavenly south region? Han Li sighed. That's true. In that case, I don't have any good suggestions either. If we were in the spirit realm, I'd be able to store this mountain in my all-encompassing pouch, but in this world... The small child shook his head in a forlorn manner. Han Li didn't know what this all-encompassing pouch was, but it was clearly some kind of spatial treasures. While he was surprised to learn that such a treasure existed, he knew that he wouldn't be able to rely on the endless sky beast to help him here. It appeared that he would have to think of a way himself. Even though he wanted to elicit the divine essence-effused mountain's assistance to cultivate the divine essence-effused light and reach the deity transformation stage, he didn't want to be essentially imprisoned in this place. Even if he had to be trapped somewhere for his cultivation, he definitely didn't want it to be Heavenly Star City. Similarly, he also didn't want to cultivate the divine essence-effused light in the Drifting Cloud Sect. With his current resounding reputation in the Heavenly South region, news of the fact that he had obtained the divine essence-effused mountain would be leaked sooner or later, and that could quite possibly result in disaster for the Drifting Cloud Sect, just as it had for the Star Palace. It was best to find an extremely safe and obscure location where he could master this cultivation art in one fell swoop, not giving anyone a chance to plot against him. However, it was still yet to be seen whether he was actually going to use this cultivation art. He had to use the glacial flames of his unbroken sink devils to attempt a breakthrough to the deity transformation stage first. If he could succeed in doing that, then he won't have to worry about cultivating the divine essence-effused light. Otherwise, no matter how powerful this cultivation art was, it wasn't worth giving up his freedom just for a chance to use it. In any case, what he had to do now was to see if he could come up with a method to take this mountain with him. If he could resolve this matter, then he naturally wouldn't have to be troubled by these concerns. With that in mind, Han Li cast aside his train of thought and patted the storage pouch hanging from his waist. A dozen or so talismans immediately appeared in his hand, all of which were tossed toward the small mountain. On this occasion, the talismans were all able to plaster themselves to the mountain's surface, and nothing seemed to have been amiss. Han Li was ecstatic upon seeing this, and he hurriedly made a hand seal. A loud explosion erupted as all of the talismans were reduced to ashes amid flashes of spiritual light. Han Li's expression darkened, but he could only heave a faint sigh as he flipped his hand over to produce a stack of formation plates. The formation plates were thrown into the air, and balls of lights of different colors began to slowly revolve around the small mountain. At the same time, the sound of chanting rang out within the cave. The dozen or so balls of light revolved around the divine essence-effused mountain, gathering speed as they did so. All of a sudden, a burst of azure light erupted from the summit of the divine essence-effused mountain, flashing a few times before disappearing. Not long after that, 11 crisp tolls of a bell rang out from within the sacred palace at the summit of the sacred mountain. The tolls of the bell were like the cries of a dragon, rising straight up into the heavens, and was audible in every corner of the heavenly star city. Immediately thereafter, the Star Palace announced that the great cultivator, Han Li, was officially joining the Star Palace as a guest elder, and was going into seclusion on the sacred mountain for a century. All of the powers that heard this news expressed mixed emotions in response, but not many of them were all that surprised. After all, if it weren't for the fact that Han Li had personally slain that Wan Tianming, the Star Palace would have been the one that had ceased to exist, as opposed to the Starfall Coalition. The situation in the scattered star seas hadn't truly settled, so any power would be trying to recruit such a powerful great cultivator to their side with all their might. Seeing as Han Li was willing to go into battle against the Starfall Coalition for the sake of the Star Palace, he had to have a strong connection with the Star Palace, so it made sense that he was now becoming their guest elder. As such, all of the powers who were still plotting against the Star Palace immediately relinquished those unrealistic plans. In the blink of an eye, many sects and powers in the inner star seas had completely shut themselves off from the outside world. Aside from the Star Palace cultivators who were hunting down the remaining Starfall Coalition survivors, the scattered star seas had become a picture of peace and serenity. Ever since the rise of the Starfall Coalition, there had been several consecutive centuries of turmoil that had persisted in the scattered star seas. Not only had a vast number of cultivators perished during the battle against these two colossal forces, many other sects had been affected as well. During this time, countless powers had been founded and eradicated. It was quite apparent that the Star Palace was going to rule over the scattered star seas, and they had recruited an almighty great cultivator to their side. So all of these powers naturally became extremely docile, and none of them wanted to be eradicated as an example to the rest of the scattered star seas. Unbeknownst to all of these powers, the fearsome newly instated Star Palace guest elder wasn't actually meditating and cultivating within a certain secret chamber in Heavenly Star City as was proclaimed. Instead, he was traveling over the ocean countless kilometers away from Heavenly Star City as a streak of azure light. The amused voice of a small child sounded beside Han Li's ears. I didn't think that you'd agree to become the Star Palace's guest elder. Even though they offered you so many spirit stones, I thought that you'd be the kind of person to reject them regardless. Aren't you always trying to avoid trouble? I do indeed try to avoid trouble as much as I can, but they're offering me a lot of spirit stones just to accept a false title without having to do any work in return. Why wouldn't I accept such an arrangement? Besides, the situation in the scattered star seas has mostly been stabilized. The Star Palace is merely hoping to use my name to intimidate all of the other powers. If I were to agree to join the Star Palace and actually stay there, all of the Star Palace elders would be much more concerned, Han Li replied with a cold smile. It's no wonder that they would be concerned. At your current level, it wouldn't be impossible for you to forcibly settle into the Star Palace. As long as you take care of all of the Star Palace elders, then develop a bunch of loyal followers, the Star Palace would be yours in about 200 to 300 years, the small child replied with a faint smile. If I had no aspirations of ascending to the spirit realm and only wished to establish a sect in the human world, that would indeed be a good option. Otherwise, what would I be doing all those useless things for? It would only hamper my cultivation. Han Li's reply was completely emotionless, as if he were entirely disinterested in such a prospect. The small child was silent for a moment before heaving a faint sigh. I greatly admire the firmness of your heart in your pursuit of the great Tao, fellow Taoist Han. Even if I were in your shoes, I would be extremely tempted to take over such a powerful force. I wonder if all cultivators who ascended to the spirit realm from your human world had such immense willpower. I'm no saint. I would be lying if I told you I wasn't tempted in the slightest by the prospect of taking over the Star Palace. However, I can't afford to waste any time on such trivial matters at present. You're a heavenly spirit beast, fellow Taoist endless sky, and your lifespan far outstrips mine, so you naturally wouldn't pay any heed to a few short centuries, Han Li replied calmly. That's true. However, it's a pity that you were unable to take the divine essence-effused mountain with you in the end. It's all right, I'll store it at the Star Palace for now. It's not like it's going anywhere, and I can come back for it when I truly need it for my cultivation. The only troubling thing is that I didn't think the mountain would be so troublesome to try and move. I've tried all types of methods, but was still unable to shrink it. Han Li's brows furrowed as he spoke. Indeed, you tried everything you could during those few days in that cave, but that mountain was like an indestructible object immune to all treasures and incantation seals. It doesn't appear as if anything exists in the human world that can shrink it. A thoughtful expression also appeared on the small child's face. Didn't you mention a powerful spatial treasure that could encompass this entire mountain? Han Li suddenly asked. You're referring to the all-encompassing pouch that my true body in the spirit realm is carrying, right? Do you have a similar treasure to this? Let me make this clear to you now. A normal spatial treasure is definitely not going to be able to contain this divine essence-effused mountain, the small child cautioned. Han Li was in a brief moment of silent contemplation before replying. I don't have a complete treasure of this nature, but I do have half of one. I only recalled that I had it a short while ago, and I could perhaps be able to use it to move this mountain. Half a treasure, the small child was a little dumbstruck. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face, and he suddenly patted his storage pouch. Black light flashed, and a strange object immediately appeared before his eyes. It was that incomplete black wind flag. Letter 1D4BB, letter 1D45F, letter 1D626, letter 1D626, letter 1D638, letter 212F, letter 1D624, letter 1D630, letter 1D628. This flag was an extremely powerful spatial spirit treasure, so it would naturally have no issue storing that mountain. The only concern was that there was only half of this flag left, so it was no wonder that Han Li was referring to it as half a treasure. A faint cry of surprise escaped from the small child's lips upon seeing this item, and a ball of azure light immediately flew out from within Han Li's sleeve. The ball of light transformed into the projection of a small child in the blink of an eye, and he waved a hand toward the object that Han Li was holding. Half of the black wind flag swayed before flying directly toward the small child. The latter caught the flag and began to carefully appraise it. This item used to be a spirit treasure, right? Spatial spirit treasure is quite rare, even in the spirit realm, but how was this treasure reduced to this state? What a pity. The small child only tossed the flag back to Han Li with a grave expression on his face after examining it for a long while. Do you think this treasure can be repaired, fellow Taoist Endless Sky? Han Li asked. Seeing as this treasure used to be a spirit treasure, it would be very difficult to completely restore it to its former condition. However, if you were to refine it again, it wouldn't be impossible to change it into a spatial treasure of a slightly lower caliber. I recall that there's a spatial treasure known as the Crimson Soul Flag that was slightly similar to this treasure, but if you want to refine that treasure. The small child's voice suddenly trailed off here. What is it? Han Li asked. There are certain secondary materials required to refine this treasure, which won't be a problem for you to obtain with your current status. However, the flag requires the sacrifices of a large number of living souls in order to be refined. The power of the flag will also be directly and completely dependent on the number of living souls sacrificed during the refinement process. It's one of the spirit realm's 7 sinister treasures, and barely ever is it refined, even in the spirit realm. If you want to be able to store the divine essence-effused mountain into the flag, you need to sacrifice at least several million living souls. As for changing this flag into other types of spatial treasures, that would theoretically be possible, but you wouldn't be able to source the materials required in this world. Only the Crimson Soul Flag is a viable option for you. Otherwise, you won't be able to refine such a treasure in your human world, the small child explained. It requires that many living souls to be sacrificed. Han Li's expression changed drastically upon hearing this. I was already giving you a conservative estimate. If you want to truly unleash the power of the Crimson Soul Flag, you'd require tens of millions of living souls. I was only giving you an estimate of several million as you're only looking to use the flag to store an object. A true Crimson Soul Flag isn't a divine spirit treasure, but it won't be too far away from a normal spirit treasure either. It's sought after by countless cultivators for its spatial abilities, the small child chuckled. Tens of millions of living souls. Unless I demolish an entire large city or island, there's no way I'd be able to gather so many living souls. Wait, maybe I can gather those souls without having to do something so heinous. Han Li firmly shook his head initially, but a thought then suddenly occurred to him. Have you found a feasible method, fellow Taoist Han? The small child was rather taken aback by Han Li's reaction. Han Li didn't give an immediate reply to the small child's question. Instead, he patted his storage pouch again, and green light flashed, following which 2 small green flags appeared in his hands. Each flag was only several inches in size, but they were shimmering with green light and covered in runes, indicating that they were clearly remarkable treasures. These were the 2 ghost-sifting banners that he had obtained during his journey to the Great Jinn, and one of them had even been taken from old Devil Kian himself. As for the other one, it had undergone devilification from injection of devilish chi, and had been in the possession of the second nascent soul. What are these? A faint light flashed through the small child's eyes, but he didn't recognize these flags. It was no wonder that this was the case. During Han Li's journey to the Kunwu Mountains in the Great Jinn, the avatar of the Endless Sky Beast hadn't developed intelligence yet, so it naturally wouldn't have seen Han Li obtaining these 2 treasures. However, it could naturally detect the astonishing soul chi emanating from the two ghost-sifting banners. Will I be able to refine the yin souls on these banners again and use it to create the crimson soul flag? Han Li asked. The small child carefully examined the ghost-sifting banners in Han Li's hands before replying. That is indeed possible. However, even though these two treasures aren't of the same caliber as a crimson soul flag, they're still extraordinary items in their own right. If you do that, they would be completely ruined. Furthermore, the souls contained within these banners are nowhere near enough to refine the crimson soul flag. It's all right, these two treasures are indeed quite powerful, but I already possess more than spirit treasure, and they're no longer very useful to me at my current cultivation base. As for the lack of souls contained within these banners, if I had a dozen or so of these banners, that'd be enough, right? Henley asked in a meaningful voice as he stroked his chin. A dozen or so? I get it now. These are just two banners that are a part of a whole set, right? Does that mean you have even more of them with you? The small child was rather surprised after arriving at this revelation. I don't have any other flags like this at the moment, but I know where the rest can be found. In reality, I know of another type of treasure containing far more souls than these ghost-sifting banners. It's a pity that the treasure is currently in the possession of a deity transformation stage demon beast. That's not someone I can mess with at the moment. Another thought occurred to Han Li, and a rather forlorn expression appeared on his face. He was naturally referring to the Myriad Demon flag in the possession of that old devil from the Myriad Demon Valley. He had personally experienced the immense might of that flag, and he knew that the demonic souls contained within that flag were of a far greater quantity and quality than those stored within the ghost-sifting banners. That treasure would undoubtedly be more suitable for refining the Crimson Soul flag. The small child naturally wasn't aware of what treasure Han Li was referring to, and he had no intention of asking about it either. He merely said in an indifferent voice, "If you can gather enough souls, then I'd be willing to bestow the Crimson Soul flag's refinement method upon you free of charge. This divine essence-effused light is quite interesting, and I'm also curious to see how powerful it would be after you master it. Are you planning to set about gathering those banners as soon as you return to the Heavenly South region, fellow Taoist Han?" "There's no hurry. Everything will have to wait until I reach the pinnacle of the late nascent soul stage and completely refine my glacial flame sink devils first. After all, the remaining ghost-sifting banners are in the possession of a nascent soul stage devilish cultivator as well, so I'll work on improving my cultivation base first. Let's return to the Heavenly South region for now," Han Li replied with a shake of his head. "All right, we'll do as you wish. After we get back, I'll give you the Crimson Soul flag's refinement method so you can gather all of the secondary materials and won't have to waste time on that later." The small child shrugged nonchalantly before the projection of its body vanished. Han Li was ecstatic to hear this, and he accelerated through the air, quickly disappearing into the distance. Several months later, Han Li returned to the Heavenly South region using that ancient teleportation formation. He stowed away the six-winged frost centipedes guarding the teleportation formation before destroying the formation once again and departing from the cave. Another 2 months later, Han Li returned to the Dreamcloud Mountains in the state of Zai. He merely informed Lu Luo of his return through the use of his voice transmission talisman before immediately flying back to the interconnected peaks. At this point in time, Nangong Wan was still in seclusion. Han Li naturally didn't go to disrupt her cultivation. A few short years of separation was nothing to cultivators like them. The entire cultivation world in the Heavenly South region wasn't even aware that the #1 cultivator of their region had departed from the Drifting Cloud sect at all. However, Lu Luo heaved a long sigh of relief upon receiving news of Han Li's return. The Drifting Cloud sect was being held up entirely by Han Li's reputation. Unless 3 or 4 more nascent soul cultivators appeared in the sect, the Drifting Cloud sect's status as a super sect would be in question if Han Li weren't around. As soon as Han Li returned to his cave abode, he deployed a flying sword to send a Jade slip to Liu Yu. The Jade slip contained a list of secondary materials required to refine the Crimson Soul flag, and he was requesting for her to try and gather those materials during his period of seclusion. After that, he entered the secret chamber again and continued to cultivate the final layer of the Azure Essence sword art, as well as to refine the Glacial Flame Sink devils. Time passed by like flowing water. 50 years flashed past in the blink of an eye. During this period, Han Li sensed that Nangong Wan had emerged from seclusion once, and he immediately also temporarily concluded his cultivation to meet her. The two of them then traveled together for half a year. During their travels, Han Li completely basked himself in his intimate relationship with Nangong Wan, and after the two of them returned, they began their bland seclusion again. Come to think of it, cultivators were rather pitiful beings. On one hand, they possessed powerful abilities and lengthy lifespans far beyond the reach of mortals. But on the other hand, they were like hamsters galloping on a wheel, constantly cultivating prior to the conclusions of their lifespans to try and grasp the extremely infinitesimal chance of attaining immortality. This lifestyle would be bearable for those who were naturally born with immense willpower, but it was enough to drive some normal cultivators insane. If they were to continue cultivating, their chances of attaining the Great Tao were impossibly slim anyway, and they really didn't want to spend the rest of their lives in seclusion like this. However, they had already embarked on the path of cultivation and were unwilling to give up on the opportunity to attain immortality, no matter how negligible their chances were. Furthermore, it was also extremely tempting to progress in one's cultivation base, as doing so would further extend their lifespan. As such, there were two extremes that existed in the cultivation world. There were some mid-grade cultivators with lowly aptitude and cultivation bases who weren't optimistic about their chances of making further breakthroughs, so they gave up on cultivation altogether. Some of them lived leisurely lives surrounded by concubines and enjoyed themselves until the ends of their lifespans, while others returned to their hometowns, founded an aristocratic family there, and ruled over the place from which they had hailed. On the other end of the spectrum, there were high-grade cultivators who felt themselves to be much closer to the ultimate objective of attaining immortality and were unwilling to waste any time. They were completely absorbed in their cultivation and paid no heed to anything else. Han Li and Nangong Wan were clearly part of the latter group. One of them was at the late nascent soul stage, while the other was at the mid-nascent soul stage, so they stood at the tip of the pyramid among cultivators of the human world. As long as they could ascend to the spirit realm, they really wouldn't be far away from immortality. As such, even though the two of them loved each other very much, they were able to exercise a lot of self-restraint when it came to indulging in their relationship. Dual cultivation was useful for advancing one's cultivation base, but the cultivation arts they were using didn't involve dual cultivation as a device of progression, and the improvements in magic power that dual cultivation brought about were quite negligible to them at their current power levels. The two of them were concerned that excessive indulgence in dual cultivation would negatively affect their mindsets and their determination in their pursuit of the Great Tao, so they had to hold back when it came to the physical aspect of their relationship. Instead, due to their common pursuit of the Great Tao, the two of them had formed a very strong tacit understanding of one another, so even though they were exercising celibacy to a certain extent, the bond between them was still extremely resolute. Thus, after going into seclusion again, neither of them were quick to come out again. One day, a thunderclap suddenly erupted amid clear skies in the air above the interconnected peaks. All of the world's origin chi within a radius of several hundred kilometers around the main peak was suddenly triggered. Countless fist-sized balls of light of different colors emerged from the ground, the rocks, and the threes, then converged rapidly toward the main peak, creating a shimmering spiritual cloud several hectares in area, putting on a spectacular light show to behold. Han Li's cave abode stood at the very epicenter of this marvelous phenomenon. Such a startling turn of events had naturally alerted all of Han Li's disciples, who were also living on the interconnected peaks, as well as Nangong Wan. All of them rushed out from their seclusion chambers and looked up into the sky with stunned expressions. The interconnected peaks were very close to the drifting cloud sect, so the higher-ups of the sect had naturally detected the events unfolding here. A dozen or so streaks of light immediately shot forth from within the drifting cloud sect's restriction formation, heading directly toward the interconnected peaks. The two people at the forefront of the group were none other than Lu Luo and Song Yu, the latter of whom had also reached the nascent soul stage. Both of them were wearing rather solemn expressions. A short distance behind them, there was a white-robed woman flying through the air with an elated look on her face. She was naturally none other than Liu Yu. During these past years, her cultivation base hadn't progressed very much, but she was the most important figure in the sect below the nascent soul elders due to the fact that she was essentially Han Li's spokesperson. Even Lu Luo and Song Yu treated her with a lot of respect. Liu Yu was feeling quite excited. If Han Li's cultivation base were to take another massive stride, then she would undoubtedly attain an even higher status within the sect, and that would naturally benefit her greatly. In reality, after tasting the pleasure that power and influence brought to her, it was impossible for her to calm her heart and return to cultivation. After all, even nascent soul cultivators had to be very respectful to her at present, and that was very pleasing to her. Besides, she was well aware of the limitations of her own aptitude. After attempting and failing several breakthroughs to the nascent soul stage, she had completely given up in that endeavor and was entirely dedicating herself to assisting Luluo in running the Drifting Cloud sect. Even if she couldn't attain the Great Tao, she didn't want to reach the end of her lifespan without having done something with her life first. As such, she really had contributed quite significantly to the Drifting Cloud sect's rapid expansion. Luluo was very pleased with her dedication to bettering the sect, and had given her a lot more jurisdictive power when it came to matters in the sect. The group from the Drifting Cloud sect flew toward the interconnected peaks, but were kept out by a restriction. They looked up as the tumbling spiritual cloud in the sky revolved and transformed into a giant funnel, looking as if it were about to slowly descend upon the interconnected peaks, and they hurriedly sent a voice transmission talisman into the restriction. Moments later, the mist standing in their way surged before parting to open up a passageway, through which the group immediately entered without any hesitation. After emerging from the mist, they were immediately greeted by the sight of Mu Paling. She was holding a yellow formation flag in her hand, and was silently awaiting their arrival. Mu Paling pays her respects to the elders of the Drifting Cloud sect. Big sister Nangong has been waiting for a long time. Please come with me. Mu Paling stowed away the formation flag before pointing toward one of the interconnected peaks in a respectful manner. Luluo and his group naturally had no objections to this, and they immediately flew toward that mountain peak. There, they discovered Nangong Wan standing at the summit in a pristine white palatial dress, appearing as if she were a celestial maiden who had descended from the heavens. However, her intricate brows were slightly furrowed, and she merely nodded gently to acknowledge the arrival of Luluo and the others. Her attention was still entirely focused on the phenomenon taking place nearby, and there were hints of concern and anxiety shimmering within her eyes. Beside her stood a man and a woman who were none other than Tian Kinner and Shi Jian. Both of them had also reached the core formation stage several decades ago. Tian Kinner had taken an evergreen pill to ensure that she held on to the appearance of a young woman around 16 or 17 years of age. Even though so many years had passed, she still looked almost no different compared to when Han Li had first taken her under his wing. After paying their respects to Song Yu and Lu Luo, the two of them stood behind Nangong Wan again with respectful expressions on their faces. Elder Nangong, is junior martial brother Han attempting a breakthrough to the deity transformation stage? Lu Luo asked with a hint of excitement on his face. Aside from a breakthrough to the deity transformation stage, what other breakthrough attempt would create such a spectacle? It's just that the heavenly omen has already been around for a while, so the breakthrough doesn't seem to be progressing very smoothly, Nangong Wan replied with concern etched on her face. Why is that? Junior martial brother Han has already been able to trigger such an astonishing phenomenon, hasn't he? Lu Luo was very surprised to hear this. Nangong Wan seemed to have done quite a bit of research on deity transformation stage breakthroughs, and she offered her own analysis. The breakthrough will only succeed after the spiritual cloud in the sky is summoned onto the mountain peak, then merged with his body. However, the spiritual cloud is falling very reluctantly, which is a sign that he's still unable to sufficiently control the world's origin chi. As such, this breakthrough may not succeed. After hearing Nangong Wan's words, everyone turned their attention to the spiritual cloud in the sky again. Just as she had said, the shimmering spiritual cloud had attempted to descend toward the mountain peak several times, but was repelled by an invisible force on all of those occasions. As a result, they were unable to truly descend onto the mountain peak, and the process didn't indeed appear to be quite a reluctant and laborious one. Luluo's heart sank upon seeing this, and he didn't ask any more questions. All he did was continue to stare intently up into the sky with an unblinking gaze. Song Yu didn't say anything, but the concern shimmering in her eyes betrayed her calm facade. The other cultivators all had mixed emotions, but with their two nascent soul stage elders among them, none of them dared to make any comments. Right at this moment, the spiritual clouds descending from the sky suddenly began to tremor violently. A peculiar ringing sound rang out, following which the massive cloud immediately began to tumble and surge unsteadily. An earth-shattering boom then erupted, and a cloud exploded into spiritual light of different colors before completely vanishing. All of the balls of spiritual light that were flying toward the mountain peak also disappeared amid an audible sigh. All of a sudden, everything around the interconnected peaks returned to normal. A slightly wistful look appeared on Nangongwan's face upon seeing this. At this moment, Song Yu suddenly broke her silence. Senior Martial Brother Han clearly already has one foot in the door toward the deity transformation stage, and he only failed on the final hurdle. With Senior Martial Brother Han's current lifespan and cultivation base, he'll be able to make many more attempts, and it's only a matter of time before he succeeds. Luluo also wore a rather forlorn expression on his face, but he nodded in agreement with Song Yu's words and said, "Indeed. Junior Martial Brother is already able to summon such an astonishing phenomenon during his first breakthrough attempt. I'm sure it won't be an issue for him to progress to the deity transformation stage." Nangongwan was silent for a moment before a wry smile appeared on her face, and she said, "What you're saying is indeed correct, but Han Li has always been extremely careful and precise in his cultivation. If he's attempting a breakthrough to the deity transformation stage now, then he must have made all of the preparations he possibly could. He must be unable to progress any further in his cultivation base before deciding to try and take this final step. In that case, unless he encounters some kind of opportunity, even if he attempts a few more breakthroughs, his efforts most likely won't amount to anything." Luluo and Song Yu were naturally aware of this as well, and they were only trying to offer words of consolation. After hearing Nangongwan's frank admission, they didn't know what to say in response. Liu Yu was naturally also feeling quite disappointed. Just as she was about to say something, Han Li's voice suddenly rang out from within the main peak. Even from so far away, his voice was clearly audible to everyone, as if he were speaking right before them. "Wanner, seeing as Senior Martial Brother Lu and Junior Martial Sister Song have already arrived, why don't you invite them into my cave abode? I'm going to have to leave the Heavenly South region for some time after my failed breakthrough attempt, and I have some things to say to them before I go. Get Liu Yu to come with them as well." Nangongwan faltered slightly upon hearing this before she turned to Lu Luo and the others with a smile, and she said, "Senior Martial Brother Lu, Junior Martial Sister Song, let's go together." Lu Luo and Song Yu glanced at one another, before flying toward the main peak together with Liu Yu in accompaniment. Xianxia and Xijian were quite disappointed that they hadn't been summoned, but they could only wait on the spot with all of the other core formation cultivators. Without the orders of Nangongwan or the other elders, the group of core formation cultivators didn't dare to leave, either. All of them began to discuss spiritedly among themselves after Song Yu and the others disappeared into the cave abode on the main peak. The few cultivators who were acquainted with Xianxia and Xijian approached the two of them and engaged them in conversation. Xianxia and Xijian had already reached the core formation stage, but due to Han Li's strict orders, they were cultivating in their respective cave abodes most of the time, and they were quite glad to have the opportunity to talk to someone. Several hours passed, yet Nangongwan and the others still hadn't emerged from Han Li's cave abode. All of the cultivators waiting outside could only speculate about what matters they were discussing. 3 months later, a streak of azure light shot forth from within the Dreamcloud Mountains, disappearing into the distance in the blink of an eye. Only after several days did news spread from the Drifting Cloud sect that Grand Elder Han had departed from the sect to embark on a journey. The objective and timeframe of his journey had intentionally been made quite ambiguous, so no one could ascertain exactly why he had left. This piece of news wasn't all that surprising to everyone. This was because news of his failed breakthrough to the deity transformation stage had already spread throughout the cultivation of the Heavenly South region, and virtually all of the sects had been made aware of this. This came as quite a relief to all of the sects that were wary toward Han Li. Even though Han Li was already the #1 cultivator in the Heavenly South region, if he were to progress to the deity transformation stage, his lifespan would be extended to over 2,000 years. That was simply far too long for all of the sects that harbored ambitions of stamping their mark on the Heavenly South region in the future. None of them wanted to be oppressed by Han Li for so long. Seeing as Han Li was unable to progress to the deity transformation stage, it only made sense that he was now embarking on a journey. After all, cultivation alone clearly wouldn't be enough to help him make any further improvements, so he could only search for opportunities to act as a catalyst for a breakthrough. Of course, the chances of him actually succeeding were pitifully slim. Otherwise, the 3 great cultivators of the Heavenly South region wouldn't have been stuck at the late nascent soul stage for so many centuries. With Han Li gone, there were only two late-nascent soul cultivators left in the heavenly South region. The Grand Elder of the Nine Nations Union, Wei Wuya, had passed away over 100 years ago. However, the Flowing Mind sect had kept this a secret for many years, and news of this had only begun to spread several years ago. This was the most shocking event that had taken place in the heavenly South region in recent years. The Nine Nations Union was plunged into turmoil as a result, and many sects and powers had erupted into conflict in the aftermath of this news being revealed. Han Li was feeling rather forlorn after hearing about this when he had emerged from seclusion. Even though Wei Wuya was only a step away from the deity transformation stage, it was that single step that barred him from being able to continue his pursuit of the Great Tao. That was a rather depressing end for such a legendary figure of the heavenly South region. However, his passing only served to further cement Han Li's resolve in his pursuit of the Great Tao. To him, everything was trivial if he couldn't attain immortality. No matter how powerful he became, everything would come to an end, and his legacy would cease to exist at some point. He was unwilling to resign himself to such a fate.